Hello, hello, welcome. You are in the den of the Grey Waste, and from across the sea in Old Valyria, I'm joined by my guest, Austin Flowers.
Hello.
Yes, Song of Ice and Fire, me being of the Grey Waste. That's the ice, you being those volcanic islands of yours, the fire.
Yes.
It
Yes,
works,
sir.
it works. And today we're going to be talking about the Blackfyre rebellion. So we're looking at House Blackfyre and the stream is titled "The Spirit of Rebellion." We're going to be looking at how House Blackfyre seems to continue on like an old grudge that just lingers, and that's how these rebellions just keep going. They keep popping up even a century after the first one was snuffed out. So lots of there's it's pretty amazing like how George has set this up, like how an event that happened over 100 years ago, even after all of the original players are long dead, just the ramifications of it, and it has how much of a ripple effect it has, how much of that echoes into the current story.
Definitely. Yeah, I think there's more than 20 parallels as to why this is happening right when it's happening.
Yeah. So like when we look at these Blackfyre rebellions, one thing that always seems to come up is they always come at a time of when, aside from the first one comes after years and years and years of prodding on the part of people like Bitter Steel and Quentin Ball and other lords that are, for the most part, were playing into Daemon Blackfyre's fancy, people that were flattering him. But it took a long time for Daemon Blackfyre to actually launch his rebellion. And we're not sure if he picked a specific moment that he did, or if he was just more forced into it, because we do know that he had planned to announce it and that those plans were leaked. Prime suspect in that seems to be Bloodraven. Me and you had discussed in the last stream you guessed it on in the Dragon's Bastards how we believe that Daemon Blackfyre is more than likely the brother that Bloodraven said that he loved, and that betraying him, that outing him to Daeron probably was the thing that was probably very, very hard for him to do.
Yes, agreed.
Mm-hmm. But after that, each subsequent Blackfyre rebellion always seems to come at a time of strife, a time where the realm looks weak. Big one in that being King Aerys I, who is very disinterested in ruling the realm. Like Bloodraven is more king than hand with Aerys at the helm, and it's in Aerys's reign that we actually get two Blackfyre rebellions. The second, which granted never quite get off the ground, but then also the third, while we don't have much information on, the third actually seems like it's the Blackfyre's best chance since the first to actually take it. And those both happen under Aerys's watch, under Bloodraven's watch.
Yeah, I think I think it was positioned that way, especially with Bloodraven in power, with that kind of silly throwaway line from the Marvel movies about how there's more supervillains now that there's more superheroes. I think just Bloodraven being in office was what spurred Bittersteel to revolt as many times as he did in the time that he did.
Mm-hmm. And it seems like Bittersteel already had, like, we have the classic Bracken Blackwood feud that always plays a hand in that. There's the differences in how Bittersteel's mother was treated versus the way that Bloodraven's mother was treated, because nobody likes the Brackens. And the fact that, like, again, like things we mentioned in the Bastards of the Dragons was how Bittersteel, despite being one of these great bastards and one of these warrior great bastards, is not given a Valyrian steel sword. Daemon gets Blackfyre, Bloodraven gets Dark Sister. Bittersteel gets no sword of any acclaim. Just I'm sure he was probably given him being who he is, the connections he have. I wouldn't doubt that he got a Valyrian steel sword of some sort, but it's not the Targaryen ancestral swords. It's not the ones of renowned name or fame that Bittersteel gets. Bittersteel's kind of like he's total middle child syndrome and getting like that's just the scraps, the worst of it.
Yeah, and I think it was instilled in him from very young via family scorn from Barba, and I think their feud runs much longer. I mean, as kids, they would have been pitted against each other from their families. As adolescents, they would have been pitted against each other because of Shiera, and then as adults, because of disagreement. And of course, George said it himself that Bittersteel was pissed off his entire life. So, I mean, there's no one point that they started hating each other. It goes back even further than they probably either remember.
Yep. And that's the thing with like the seeds of the Blackfyre rebellions are planted so many years in advance. And a lot of this has to do with their father, with the way that Aegon the Unworthy ran the realm.
Right.
And one thing of note is when Daemon is coming of age, especially in the time that after Aegon the Fourth passes and Daeron the Good takes over. One thing that I noticed that kind of tends to go overlooked is just how big of an age gap there is between Daeron and Daemon, because there is a 17-year age gap. And we know that a lot of these lords that were buttering Daemon up, trying to get him to rebel and failing until more closer voices like Bittersteel and Quentin Ball really got him going. These are the lickspittle lords, the suck-ups and sycophants that were in power under Aegon the Fourth, but then got swept out when Daeron took control. So you got to wonder how much of this is really them thinking that Daemon is the better king, or if it's just better that he's a younger king and more pliable to their whims, and that how much of this is just them trying to get back the positions that they had that they lost now that a competent king is in charge.
Right. He had everything stacked in his favor. He was popular for more than one reason, as either as an instrument of political maneuvering or as a younger, better, more warrior-like. I mean, he had the look, he had the car, he had everything. Mm-hmm. So he was just a better choice in many, many ways. But probably not as a ruler, but I mean, we'll never know.
No, and that's one of those are the things that we really want to look at in this idea, the spirit of rebellion, is taking a look not just at Daemon Blackfyre and his children and the plots that would come after his death with the other attempts that we see with the second, third, fourth rebellions, but also the houses that stuck themselves to the Blackfyre cause. We have followers like Eustace Osgrey who genuinely did believe that Daemon was the better man, even though he admits in the Sworn Sword that Daemon did promise to restore some of the Osgrey lands that they had lost over the years. But but at the same time, when he gives his speech about the traitors and the rebels and how if the Black Dragon had won, that how they would be they would be remembered as the heroes and the people who supported Daeron would be the traitors. He gives a lot of reasoning for siding with Daemon over Daeron, and this idea that Blackfyre, that the old king saw something in him, that being Aegon the Fourth, that he meant for Daemon to be his heir and not Daeron, and putting this idea of Blackfyre as a symbol until Egg reminds him that the sword is not the kingdom.
Right. Yeah. I think a lot of people only saw what they wanted to see.
Mhm.
Especially Eustace Osgray. He's one of the big candidates that's you don't really catch on to how much of his personality you're picking up out of what he's saying. You know, a lot of it is history and very interesting history. And not only is he describing a battle, but he's describing it in such a way that you really see a lot of who he is. And, you know, that tracks back to Septon Maribald's speech about broken men. I mean, Osgray is the perfect candidate for someone who is mentally, you know, broke and never ever took one step towards repair. Um, and it's
No.
it's an interesting way to see things.
Yeah. Because so much of Eustace's Osgray story is nostalgia. It's him throughout the entirety of the Sworn Sword. He's talking to Dunk about all of the things that the Checky Lion used to own, how our land stretched from here to here, and this is what we're reduced with. And never truly healing from the death of his three sons, because he lost all three of his sons on the Battle of Redgrass Field. And
Right.
when it becomes out that when Dunk realizes that he fought for the Black Dragon, he laments that he didn't go over the narrow sea with Bittersteel, that he didn't join the Golden Company at its founding, things of that nature.
Right.
And
yeah, definitely had that PTSD where he regrets not moving either way, right? He regrets not dying in a way, but he also regrets not taking off with the people in exile too.
And then another supporter that, because we see when we get to the next Dunk and Egg story, the Mystery Knight, when we have Sir Glendon Flowers pop up as the son of Fireball. Fireball is renowned as one of Daemon's biggest supporters. In fact, he's the one who kind of scurried Daemon to safety when word got out, before he could be arrested. But then Fireball is killed the night before the Battle of the Redgrass Field. But Fireball's also, his main interest is that he is scorned by Daeron the Good because of broken promises made by Aegon IV. But what's interesting about that is Aegon IV, how much of his promises can you really hold to? Because the man was quite frivolous in his rule. He took from one house, gave to another, but everything was all depending. Like his feelings changed with the day. So it seems like Quentin Ball, for his part, was putting a lot into the promises of a man who was famous for breaking promises, and yet this becomes the reason for his support of the Blackfyre cause.
Yeah, I mean, if Quentin Ball could have had sex with Aegon IV, maybe then he would have kept half the promise. But unfortunately, he didn't. Aegon IV didn't swing that direction.
No. I mean, sometimes when it comes, he did not have the a hole's a hole mindset. It only works.
No, he did not. No, he did.
Only if it was another woman. So when we get to the second Blackfyre Rebellion, even though it never actually gets off the ground, so much of it is rooted in the failures of the first. And the second Blackfyre's Rebellion is interesting in that a lot of the players that we see in it are houses that should know better, that have already been smacked down once. Yet here they are again plotting, and they're throwing their weight behind a candidate who doesn't even have the support of Daemon Blackfyre's biggest supporter, who is Bittersteel.
Right.
And when I was looking at the houses, that were invited to the tourney at White Walls, there's some of them are old and some of them are new. And it also, like, some of the things that happen is in the years in between Daeron the Good's passing and Aerys taking the throne, a lot of things have changed. The winds are blowing in a whole new direction, and that is what sets the stage for a second Blackfyre rebellion to begin, to even happen. And that's what I want to wanted to focus on, how these rebellions always tend to crop up in times of strife. Because up until the first Blackfyre rebellion, Daeron the Good seemed to be doing pretty well. Like the realm was at peace. Dorne had been brought into the kingdom. Like aside from this Blackfyre rebellion, we never really hear about any other wars during the time of Daeron the Good. So
Right.
it really does.
Well, there was there was the spring sickness, and then the third Blackfyre rebellion came after that. But again, that fits into times of strife, right?
Mm-hmm.
That they struck during naturally once the wards had died out. All the wards they sent got the spring sickness and died out. Not even Old Town was safe. So yeah, again, and then there's peaceful periods like well, I don't want to say until we get later on when we get Aegon the Fifth in, and then it seemed like a pretty good time, but we still had the War of the Nine Penny Kings.
Mm-hmm.
But I think they definitely were advantageous, and I think that's kind of echoed with that could be one of the reasons a lot of people think that Illyrio and Varys are working together on a Blackfyre plot, because this is a really advantageous time. I mean, the king is what, 7? Yeah, it's and his mother is regent, and everybody's getting, it's like Trump's personal cabinet. Everybody's getting laid off or fired, and different people are coming in, and it's upsetting a lot of people. Those who sided with Renly, those who were in the Riverlands, before that got raised. Yeah, I think it's a time of great upset, and we shouldn't doubt for a second that if a Blackfyre rebellion were to happen, it would be at the current time in the story. But I know we'll go into that a little bit later. So
yeah, and the other parallel is like we brought up the Great Spring Sickness, and now we also have in the current story we have a potential outbreak of grayscale.
We do, yes,
coming with John Connington. But yeah, so in this time, so going back to where we are in the years following the first Blackfyre rebellion and leading into the second, so 209 AC, the year of the spring sickness, and thousands are going to die across the Seven Kingdoms, including Daeron the Good and his 2 grandchildren, the sons of Baelor Breakspear. And that is what's going to put Aerys the First on the throne, because Aerys the First, for his part, did not think that he was ever going to be king. He had Baelor Breakspear, he had his older brother, and that man having children. Aerys was in the way that Maekar and Aegon and his son Aegon the Fifth later, he was actually at the beginning pretty far down the line of succession before he came to the throne, because he had Baelor Breakspear and his 2 nephews in front of him. And yet now here he is now being made into king, and he has absolutely no interest in it. So he hands it off to his hand, who is Bloodraven. And Bloodraven's standing in the kingdom, as far as public perception is already pretty skewed. And
right.
And there's this idea of that. One of the things I was thinking about when it comes to this is there are perceptions of things on how we handle them, and there's real ideas, and then there's their perceived ideas. One of them is like in the way that Bloodraven handles things, since he's basically ruling the realm for Aerys. And one of these is his handling of the Great Spring Sickness. And it's really interesting, because especially given the times that we're currently living in, the times of COVID, it raises the question of, when you have a pandemic, when you have thousands upon thousands of dying all across the realm from a sickness, really, what exactly can you do? And we're living in a technological wonderland, and it's taken years for COVID to get under control, if you can even call it under control. So
Right.
think like in Bloodraven's position, is there more he could have done? And that's, like I said, a perception. What really can a man do, especially when you're living in this medieval like period where you don't have medicine or technology or anything to really get the word out on what exactly can stave off sickness.
Well, I mean, the right thing to do, it's funny you say that because, especially being on an island, the right thing to do is to isolate Dorne, the Vale, the things that they did, where they just closed the gates and that was it. It was done. It because it never made it in, nobody got affected, but everybody that was left out was pretty much left to fend for themselves. And isolation is the only way, right, Christina? Yep, isolation is the only possible way. But you're not going to be popular at the time when hundreds of thousands of people, die of starvation because of lack to access of resources, especially in places like King's Landing or high density, populated areas. Dorne is perfect because they're mostly insulated anyway. They just had to close the boneway, a Prince's Pass, and that, and then that's it, done. But even places like Old Town got overrun because they didn't. No, didn't they? Once they closed their gates and it worked, but then there was another time that they didn't.
But then they murdered. Then they murdered the Hightower Lord because.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So you're not going to be popular when you just shut the gates on everybody, but that's the only thing that you can do. Also, if the people had boarded up the outbreak, is a different thing. I think not being able to contain something is the same as not being able to isolate something, and I think that'll definitely be a foil coming up if there's an outbreak anywhere near King's Landing, would be to isolate and or burn King's Landing to the ground. Again, I'm still holding on to King's Landing burning being a good idea, and the only way I could see that is with a grayscale epidemic, pandemic, outbreak of some kind. So, and I know people die. I'm sorry, Christina. Sorry.
No. But that's like so that works into this perception of Bloodraven, things that I guess what I'm trying to get at is like things that are going on that lead to the idea of a second Blackfyre rebellion even being plausible, and a third and a fourth and so on. Is what is Bloodraven's fault and what isn't Bloodraven's fault? What can he do? What could he have done more? Where are the areas that he truly was lacking, and which are the areas that he really was doing the best that he could do? Now, the Great Spring Sickness is one where the perception is he should be doing more, but he probably is doing all that he can. But then other things where he isn't doing all that he can, we see in the raids by the Ironborn, because during the time of when the second Blackfyre rebellion is being plotted, this is also the height of Dagon Greyjoy, the last Reaver. And it seems like the Crown, Bloodraven, and it's mentioned in the Mystery Night, while Bloodraven is in the guise of Maynard Plum, Sir Kyle the Cat says that Lord Bloodraven is too focused on, or no, he says that nothing's being done about Dagon Greyjoy, and Bloodraven in the guise of Maynard Plum says, well, he's looking at Tyrosh for Bittersteel, and that's all well and good, but the thing is that you're worried about a plot that may or may not be happening. But the thing about Dagon Greyjoy is it is happening, and you know for a fact it is happening. But it's being left to the Reach, to the Westerlands, to the North to take care of it. At the beginning of the Mystery Night, one of the ideas that Duncan the Tall has for him and Egg in their travels is to go to Winterfell to join up with Baron Stark, who's gathering swords to fight Dagon Greyjoy. And then it's also mentioned that the Lannisters under Tybalt Lannister are building a fleet of ships to take the battle to the Ironborn. So again, like this is a thing where the Crown should be lending support and bringing the Kraken back into line, but they're not. Bloodraven is focused more on Tyrosh and Bittersteel and this current Blackfyre plot. So Dagon Greyjoy is running free, and he probably ran free for a lot longer than he really should have been.
Right. Yeah, I think that's an interesting point. I wonder at what point in the Mystery Knight novel did Bloodraven just say, you know what, fuck it, Bittersteel's not coming. Let's just put an end to this as quickly as possible, instead of making an example out of these people. Let's just squash it before it begins. I wonder if that's even during the novella itself, or if he showed up as Maynard Plum a few days ahead of his army to do just that, to see what it was. But I think there was a strong. He thought the likelihood that Bittersteel would be there was probably high. Judging on the fact that how quickly Bloodraven was all over it.
Mm-hmm. And that's what's when we look at the houses that were there, that were invited to the tourney at White Walls, one that stuck out to me was House Veerwell. This is a house, House Veerwell. The Lord and Lady Veerwell attended the tourney at White Walls. Once the plot was discovered, a man claiming to be in their service boasted of being one of Bloodraven's spies, and he was then murdered by a man in service to which one was it? It was House Costain, who were Blackfyre supporters. And Veerwell is interesting because their sigil, they have a white dragon on a black field. It's very reminiscent of Bloodraven's personal sigil. And it actually makes me think that House Veerwell may have been not actual. If they were Blackfyre supporters, then they're one of these families that weren't completely dedicated to the cause, may have been there getting more of a feel for things. Or
Right.
they may have been, this may have been a family that the entire time was fully in league with Bloodraven and were there acting as his spies, and then one of them had a big mouth.
Right. Yeah, I thought that was that was pretty funny that there was still so much hatred. Even as the rebellion's getting squashed, the one guy speaks up,
Mm-hmm.
It was me, I was the spy, and then he's immediately dispatched. It's just like, wow, there's a lot of emotions riding high at that, at the Ashford tourney, simply because, the Redgrass field was left, so with the leaders getting away in exile. I can imagine there was a lot of really, really upset houses for a while.
Mm-hmm.
After that, waiting for the next rebellion. So yeah, a lot of them did jump on the second rebellion, even though it didn't happen. There was still a lot of very, I would say, like mid-range, mid-wealth houses. Even the ones that lost most of their land and holdings were still prestigious houses.
Yeah.
Peak,
Yeah. And that's true, because a lot of this is coming off the Great Spring Sickness. One of the reasons why there even was such a gap between the first and second rebellion, because it's a 15-year gap. Battle of Redgrass Field happens in 196, and the tourney at White Walls, the second Blackfyre rebellion plot, is in 211. Gorman Peak states himself that after the Great Spring Sickness, the hostages that these families had sent to King's Landing, a lot of them perished as well. And so they're kind of like, well, now that was the one thing that was keeping them in line. And once the hostages perish and they have nothing left to lose, that's when we see some of these houses trying again. And the peaks are really interesting in that one because the Peaks just never seemed to learn. They lost.
Right.
They had 3 castles, and the Peaks are interesting to me because they're already a house that should have been walking on thin ice from the time of Aegon the Third, like years and years before Daemon Blackfyre is even born. They're they're already treading a fine line because of the actions of Unwin Peak when Aegon the Third was a kid, and yet here they are. They participate in the first Blackfyre Rebellion, and they participate in the second Blackfyre Rebellion. I'm assuming they participate in the third, and they more than likely were planning on helping out in the fourth because they have their own uprising, which seemed like, which given the time that it happened, seemed like a premature launch of the fourth rebellion itself.
Right. You'd think they would have tried marriage or something, or buying their way in or something.
Well, they did
anything else.
Unwin Peak tried marriage and that didn't work.
Oh, that's true. Yeah,
that's true.
Yep.
But Gorman Peak does state so. So we have the Great Spring Sickness and how that plays into it. Hostages that were sent to the King's Landing are now dead, and that frees up some of these houses that have these resentments against the crown, or resentments against Dorne, or resentments against Bloodraven, to try to try all of this over again. And then you also have some newer houses joining, and they're the ones that have a bone to pick with the current situation because of things like Dagon Greyjoy and how that issue isn't being addressed. We're coming off of this. We're coming off of this year-long, on top of the Great Spring Sickness, we're also coming off of this year-long drought and prices skyrocketing. And then people look and they see like, well, what's being done about this? Nothing's being done. But then it comes back to, well, is nothing being done? Because really, what can you do? And it's a question of, is Bloodraven doing all that he can? But we can only put so much on Bloodraven because no matter how you slice that, it really should be Aerys focusing on all of this.
Right.
And he simply isn't. This is a very absentee king.
Yeah. True. Although I'm sure it was more interesting to, I don't know, and maybe analyze the history of the time rather than, deal with what's right in front of you. I don't know who was. I gotta look this up. Who was Aerys the first wife?
It was a lady of House Penrose.
Okay, all right. House Penrose. Yeah, I think it was just it wasn't in his. Yeah, like you said, he never meant to be king. I don't think it was just in his wheelhouse. I think he left it up to Bloodraven, but even Bloodraven didn't. I see him killing Gorman Peak in, after the second failed rebellion as like a precursor to him killing Aenys Blackfyre, because he was trying to figure out what worked, right? And obviously this didn't work with the Peaks to just start beheading people. But if he could really get them isolated, like he did with Aenys being the last of the Blackfyres, I think killing people is a little more efficient than even imprisoning them, like Daemon II. That's just my 2 cents, but it seemed after Aenys to calm down a little bit, at least until, even the War of the Nine Penny Kings wasn't labeled a Blackfyre rebellion, even though it was led by Meleys. So I don't know. I think he did something right when he figured out that killing Blackfyres is the only way to really stop Blackfyres. So
yeah, that's something we raised, like the differing ideas of how to handle this, because after the first Blackfyre rebellion, it was Baelor. Egg mentions that when he served as a page at court, Baelor Breakspear had argued for leniency, and it was Bloodraven arguing that no, you need to cut off the head. You need to put them all to death. And we see like the pros and cons of that, because Baelor Breakspear argues for leniency, and they're lenient against houses like the Peaks, but the Peaks keep rebelling. And then on the other hand, you have Bloodraven, who's arguing of like, no, you got to kill them all. You got to squash it from the very beginning. You can't even give it room to grow. He kills 80's Blackfyre, but that isn't a deterrent for the Blackfyres. If anything, that just hardens their cause and just makes them even more willing to take the risk of yet another rebellion.
Right.
So you really are. It really is trying to walk a fine line and trying to get at what works here.
That's true. Yeah, you're right. I think the best position they were in was when he had Daemon II captive.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I think you're right. What works with the middle houses might not work with the Blackfyres in particular.
And I get like the Peaks. The Peaks really just boggle my mind, to be honest, because they had 3 castles. They lose 2 after the first rebellion. Their lord is executed after the second rebellion. They cause a rebellion all of their own in which they kill a king. They push a boulder onto Maekar's head. And yet they still have a castle. But other houses go extinct for far less. Like House Lofton is gone. House Strong is gone. House Strickland only exists in exile. They lost everything. So how the Peaks are still around and how they still have Starpike, even in this day and age, how there is still a Lord Peak in the current story. I don't.
It's a little baffling.
I don't understand. Yeah. It's one of the things like, George, I need a new book of you of some kind, because this one you got some splaining to do of how this family still retains anything when you have other houses being just absolutely snuffed out for so much less. The Peaks must have something going for them. Something must be important at Starpike for them to still be around.
Yeah, just the fact that they have Starpike gives them like an air of the Danes. Like they could be one of those ancient houses that's not typically. Oh yeah, it is a first men origin. So yeah, I don't know. You know, a lot of firstborn houses died out, but apparently not House Peak.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no.
And then,
yeah, it's weird. And then they have like innocuous stuff, like at the Great Council of 101, Lord Peak voted for Prince Viserys. So they have times when they were. Lord Unwin Peak supported the Greens. It's like they're on and then they're off, and then they're on and then they're off, these peaks.
Yeah.
But the fact that they're still around after, subsequent rebellions with no redeeming qualities in between is strange. Although their family was large. Oh wow. Yeah, their family was relatively large and goes back, and they're relatively well known. So I would say, I don't know, I'd put them up there with the Danes. The Danes of bad choices.
Yeah. And then there's other weird houses, because like House Ironwood supports the Blackfyres in 3 out of the 5 rebellions. And they're a Dornish house. And what's interesting about that is that another thing that leads to the rebellions is how much of it is rooted in anti-Dornish sentiment, because the majority of Blackfyre supporters tend to be Marcher lords, lords from the Reach and the Stormlands who historically have warred with Dorne. And yet here is a Dornish house that is continuously putting its support behind the Blackfyre cause. And it echoes into our current story, because House Martell may be throwing support behind Fagon, who probably is leading a new Blackfyre rebellion, either knowingly or actually really unknowingly, because he seems pretty convinced that he truly is Aegon Targaryen.
Right.
And
which we know to be dubious at best.
dubious at best. Like, I'm just gonna I'll say it like so the audience knows. Like, I'm firmly rooted in that the idea that Fagon is a Blackfyre. I don't think I'm not into the Trugon, and I'm not into the idea that he's just some pisswater prince, that he's some nobody. No, like I'm on board that Fagon is a Blackfyre because of the sheer amount of Golden Company support and how the Golden Company has always historically been for the Blackfyre cause.
Right.
And the fact that the Golden Company is famous for never breaking a contract, yet they've broken a contract for this. And it just doesn't seem right that they would break a contract for some random kid. There needs to be a solid reason for why they do that. And that's why we have the tagline that I used for the YouTube thumbnail, which is some contracts are written ink and some in blood. It's this blood tie that's going back for over a century, that's bringing the Golden Company into the fold.
Yeah. All right. Sorry, I'm just looking at a House Peaks. Once you get searching, but I'm just looking at House Peaks. Their I guess their lords throughout the years, and they have a Lady Irma Peak, which totally sounds like a Ironwood name. It's YRMA, so it'd be easy enough to say Irma Ironwood. And then they have Edison Peaks. Edison comes up, not just House Tollet, but a couple other houses. In the Reach, I believe. Yeah. Tallheart, Karstark. Oh, it's in the north. And then, Edison Peak. That's interesting. That Peak would be so, like somebody said in the chat, security through obscurity. They kind of just rode in the back until they crashed the bus. So that's interesting. All right.
So, and back to House Ironwood. I've always joked that House Ironwood is like Dornish Boltons. It's this idea. It's this
It's true.
But it's the idea of, and this is where most Blackfyre support comes from. It always comes from second and third tier houses. It's never a main house. Like, you never see a Lannisters or Starks or Tyrells or Tullys. Like that's never where Blackfyre support is coming from. But it's coming from Ironwoods. It's coming from Sunderlands. It's coming from, I have all the houses listed. Butterwell, Bracken, Costain, Heddle, Lofts, Osgray, and then there are other houses that kind of keep 1 foot in each camp, like the High Towers and the Rains and the Tarbecks. And then you also have houses that just completely betray you, like Lofts. But again, it's never these huge main houses. It's never the great lords as we would think. It's always the smaller houses, the ones that are trying to get ahead.
Well, it's funny you mentioned that. It's almost as if the first Blackfyre Rebellion was riding on the great grand shoulders of Aegon the Conqueror, right? Anybody who sided with Aegon the Conqueror, was awarded lands and titles when he unified the realm. So you had these, other families that didn't immediately give up their lands. Mm-hmm. I'm trying to think. I think the Ironwoods were one of those that they were edged out little by little by just the fact that Aegon had, friends. Like the Tullys were a good example. They were nothing until they backed Aegon.
Same with the Tyrells. The Tyrells were stewards.
The Tyrells. Yep. And so that's, and then you have, the Blacks and the Greens and everybody that lost that. And it snowballed into these like older but somehow lesser houses, um, rebelling just on what family tradition, family, their family's honor had been disgraced so long ago by a Targaryen at some point. Um, so yeah, they had every reason to rebel. Some of them are even tragically funny, that they would rebel, and I can't even think of the one that I'm thinking of in particular right now. Anyway, go on.
Um, but House Ironwood is also in this. It falls in line with this case is like, and same with House, as far as Dorne goes, like House Dane is similar. Not for Blackfyre support, but that these were used to be the more powerful houses until the Martells rose up, and the Martells come to prominence once you get Nymeria and the Royn are coming, and then that strength being lended to their houses, and how power shifts. But there's always this want to go back to the time of before, and that's why I said like so much of Blackfyre support seems to be rooted in nostalgia, a bygone time when our family was in charge, when we owned this back
Right.
before these Tullys, before these Tyrells, before these Martells, before they were the great house of this kingdom. We were the great house, and it's trying to reclaim that. Ironwood wants to subvert Martells the same way that Bolton's would like to subvert the Starks.
Right.
But while we're on the second Blackfyre Rebellion, I know there was an idea you had regarding Alan Cockshaw and the well.
Oh yeah. Well, it was it was actually something I just noticed because it was an odd. It was almost a mistake made by George. He usually gives these perfect situations where it's like a perfect allegory, like he'll fit things different ways. But there was one in the Mystery Night, or sorry, not the Mystery Night. What's it called? Yeah, no, sorry, the Mystery Night. Where when Alan Cockshaw goes to kill Dunk and throw him down a well, in the story at that certain point after after Dunk overpowers Cockshaw, three things happen. Dunk is looking for Egg. He goes down to the tourney grounds, and they mysteriously pull this egg out of Glendon Ball's, or they accuse Glendon Ball of having this egg. And then Alan Cockshaw, comes and he takes Dunk away. So you're already thinking on a lot of these levels, and it's only afterwards that Maynard Plum tells us that, Egg is in the Sept, or Egg is at the, the church, for lack of a better word. And then we learn that actually Dunk puts it together without us hearing his thoughts on this one. He puts it together verbally, and we only hear it once it comes out of his mouth. But he says that the egg that they found in Glendon Ball's bags was likely a stone painted to look like an egg. So we have an egg in the temple, Egg on the Fifth. He's in the Sept. He's in the church. He's in you could call it a temple area. And then we have a rock masquerading as an egg. And then when Cockshaw tries to stab Dunk and throw him down a well, Dunk grabs a rock, a stone, and he hits Alan with it. Now, for the perfect trifecta, I think he would have hit Alan in the temple, right? Because we have a stone as an egg in the temple, and then we should have a stone to the temple. It's like perfect. It always stuck out to me that it doesn't go like that. Instead, Dunk feeds his lordship the stone. Yeah. And this is a really unsettling line, not only because it's visceral, because you don't eat stones. So when Dunk feeds a stone to somebody, it's, it kind of just, the writing is just so perfect, but it's a really standout line. And I always thought, that's so weird. Why would, George throw in that, he fed a stone to his lordship. Oh, that's kind of strange. But then looking forward to John Connington, who's like Alan Cockshaw, he's a unrequited Blackfyre supporter. John Connington was in love with Rhaegar, and Cockshaw was in love with Daemon II. And they're these kind of parallel characters, Connington and Cockshaw. They're not in Connington's case, he's playing actually both like Peake and Cockshaw. He's doing the the role of hand and the role of advisor, and he's really the only person there. I wouldn't say there's another person close to Fagon of the same level of importance. So he's playing both characters there. But if Connington does have grayscale, which I mean he does, but if it's kind of weird. I'm thinking, he's got grayscale. Is he going to touch Fagon? And is Fagon going to get grayscale and then die before he can ever? And as neat as that idea is, it's not a grayscale outbreak. And so what kind of struck me was that if Connington were to take the same tumble down a well as Connington or as Cockshaw did, he would wind up feeding the stone to everybody who drank from the well. So I think George I don't think he left that missed connection there of the perfect, egg temple sept well. I think he put that bit in for foreshadowing because I think everything that happened in the Blackfyre rebellions is going to happen again with the upcoming, we have the attorney in the Vale. We have, I think there's another tourney upcoming as well. And we have the Ironborn up and down the coast. So I think a lot of these key moments are going to replay in odd, ironic ways, and I think this is definitely one of them. Yeah. If Connington were to go down a well in King's Landing, or God forbid, like Flea Bottom or some heavily populated area, and people were to drink from that well, the same thing would happen that happens in the Sorrows. Everybody that drank would contract grayscale of some kind.
Yeah. Well, no, it's like, because like when we first hear the name Dagon Greyjoy, it's in reference to Euron. So, and here we have again. Now we have Euron, who's like Dagon turned up to 11.
Right.
One of the in nearly every Blackfyre rebellion except for the 5th, because it's part of the overarching War of the Nine Penny Kings, the North is always absent because the North is always dealing with something of its own trouble. In the first Blackfyre rebellion, we're told that during the time of Daeron II, the North was dealing with a rebellion from Skagos that took years to put down, and one of the Lords of Winterfell died in it. So that's why we don't see Northern support in the first Blackfyre rebellion. In the second Blackfyre rebellion, it's the North that's mainly dealing with Dagon Greyjoy. Same with the third Blackfyre rebellion. Dagon Greyjoy is still running rampant. In the fourth Blackfyre rebellion, that's coming off of a 6-year-long winter, and we know that the North always gets hit the hardest with winters, so it stands to reason that they're not helping out in the fourth Blackfyre rebellion because they're just
they
dealing
can't.
with that. They can't.
Yeah, that's a really it's really funny that the North keeps getting tied up and isn't able to participate in the Blackfyre rebellions, because I'm sure the Boltons would have made a claim like the Ironwoods did against the Starks, just like against our Ironwoods against House Martell. It would be ripe, for any lesser house than the Starks to try to revolt during a Blackfyre rebellion and to claim something from that. So I wonder what's going to happen with the Boltons in this next little bit, if they're even going to be, make it that long to get down to the south. I'm sure Roose won't, but maybe, I'm sure Ramsay won't, but maybe Roose will. Who knows? But yeah, it's kind of funny now that you talk about the Ironborn like that. The metaphor of Crow's Eye and the metaphor of the Ironborn as crows is appropriate because they'll come and they'll steal your food, they'll pick at your stuff, and you're literally unable to get to them.
Mhm.
They'll take off in their boats once again, and they'll sail back to Wick or Pike. And once they get there, it's impossible to fight the Ironborn on their own shores, pretty much. So it's like an odd allegory that they keep, or odd metaphor that they keep coming back and just pecking, and then making off, and then it's like a mosquito or a crow of
Yeah,
some sort.
they're always a thorn in the side, but
Yeah,
they provide a useful distraction, which is exactly what's happening which is how they're gonna play into Fagon's favor with this possible sixth Blackfyre rebellion. And again, the North is dealing with its own internal issues with the Battle of Ice, the Boltons and the Freys, that they're too distracted to notice a Blackfyre rebellion happening. So we're kind of left with, well, who's going to deal with it? And even the Vale is caught up in its own situation with this current tourney that's happening, and probably the upcoming death of Sweet Robin if Littlefinger gets his way. So who's
right.
going to be there to really deal with this sixth Blackfyre rebellion? Well, it's going to be the ones that are always dealing with the Blackfyre rebellions: the Reach, the Stormlands, Dorne, and the Riverlands. And that's always where the bulk of Blackfyre support has come from. Has been from Reach houses, Stormlander houses, and Riverland houses. So I agree. It's like it's not history repeating, but it's history echoing, and that
Right.
it's always these parallels that George builds. And I say this, I've said this in nearly every single stream that I've been on. It's never a perfect 1-to-1 ratio, but you can always trace the pattern.
Right. No,
Yeah.
exactly. It either echoes or it rhymes.
Mm-hmm.
When it doesn't repeat entirely. Although, I mean, this whole thing with House Blackfyre and what people assume, and I'm sure we'll get into like Illyrio and Varys,
Mm-hmm.
but they have their echoes and their counterparts too. The way Illyrio is introduced in the first book is opposite Robert. These two kind of, this Westerosi fat gelatinous king,
Mm-hmm.
powerful person, and then you've got Illyrio, this associate fat gelatinous powerful, and they're right there in the first chapters of Game of Thrones, they're presented opposite each other in that same powerful vein.
Mm-hmm.
So it's interesting, and I was just thinking earlier today how many, it's so funny that they know that they need a Targaryen. Like Varys is right. It doesn't matter the color of the dragon. There should be a Targaryen on the throne, and that's Robert's only claim. His thin blood relation
Yeah.
through his grandma
His grandmother. Yeah.
was the only, that tenuous thread is the only thing holding his kingship
Yeah.
in power at all. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's kind of fun.
Well, with Robert, it's like the concept of the law as written and the law in action. Now he's using that claim of Targaryen ancestry through his grandmother, but really he's taking it through conquest.
Right.
And which is also how, and the Blackfyres have that claim. They have that claim of Targaryen ancestry, but in reality, it's trying to take it through conquest.
Right. Right. I mean, the claim is something that they'll make on the throne. Once they're in the throne room, then they can make that claim.
Mm-hmm.
Which I think is interesting because the story on a larger scale is geared towards John being Rhaegar's son. And it's been 5 books, and there's only been clues, and there's only been hints, and apparently George uses the answer of John's parentage as some sort of metric as to how much people know or what's the word, like theorize about the series. But I was thinking earlier, John is is kind of the antithesis to Fagon. They're presented against each other. Fagon's been raised to be this king. Jon has not been raised to be Lord Commander, yet he is. You know, it's I think whatever it is that Fagon will set out to do on the throne is ultimately going to be revealed that Jon, you know, like who was it? Lancelot's son. Didn't Arthur
Wayne?
go to what's that one?
I'm not as
Okay.
good with Arthurian legend, but
No,
would it
but
be
oh
was it
god,
Gawain?
Arthur was told that the person who could watch his kingdom and who wouldn't try to steal it was to be found at, shoot, I can't remember wherever he found Lancelot, but he went there and he found Lancelot and he brought him back and he let Lancelot rule the kingdom while he was away. Lancelot and Guinevere fell in love, blah blah blah. But the choice was Lancelot's son. And the only reason that, you know, Arthur didn't see it is because he went there and the only knight, the only person his own age was Lancelot. And he wasn't even thinking that the 11-year-old son was actually the true steward of kingship. So I was thinking that the whole, you know, all 7 books might be geared towards this perfect situation in which Jon is the Stark that was meant to be. He's the Targaryen that was meant to be. And I think this lead up of Fagon is to get us in the mindset that there is a male Targaryen line, but this isn't it. You know, we want Dany to be in control, and we want, you know, big things for Dany. But when we're faced with a Targaryen king, we could be, I don't know, they're just pitted against each other as a foil. So if Aegon does take the throne as the Mummer's dragon, I think it's a precedent for Jon's parenthood to mean something. Because as it is, it doesn't. It's not going to come out that he's the rightful, you know, ruler, especially with Dany out there. And I don't want anything to happen to Dany, but the only way that could ever come to fruition is, you know, through Fagon being revealed as being false, right? Dany is the slayer of lies, and we, you know, assume anything that comes out of Varys' mouth to be a lie. So all this stuff about Fagon to be ultimately false, and Dany will somehow slay that. But the antithesis to Fagon is not Dany; it's Jon. You know, somebody same like Dany, who's done their entire lives, who's raised their entire lives to be, you know, nothing special, but has stepped up in big ways. Dany was raised to be something special, but both her and Jon have stepped up in huge ways, above and beyond their station. Especially, you know, Dany is Khaleesi. You know, they go above and beyond what they're supposed to. So I think the whole idea that what's happening with Fagon being a Blackfyre is great, because it moves the story into the focus of the small folk and into this focus of the kingdom. But then we have these characters that are so archetypically good and so, I don't know, not like classically Targaryen, that it's really going to mean something from the other side of the story when Jon's parenthood is revealed and, you know, Dany gets to Westeros and all that. I think it'll do more for the story, even though people don't see the Blackfyre Rebellion as going anywhere. I think it you know, spells out a lot more than we currently imagine, because it's going to flip, you know, like the houses are going to flip over. Not literally, but those, you know, presumably if Fagon does take the throne, which is pretty much what, you know, Quaith's prophecy says, you know, the Mummer's dragon.
Yeah. Even
you
if
know,
it's
he's
just,
at least going to campaign.
Yeah, even if it's just like a king for a day situation.
Yeah, exactly. And it might come down to that, but it needs to be, you know, in people's heads that there is this Targaryen prince out there. And then, you know, it'll roll around with Jon's parentage, and that will ultimately come into focus for the rest of the kingdom.
Yeah.
Because the last thing anybody wants is Rhaegar's son, is, you know, Aerys the second's daughter. that's the last thing anybody wants right now. But I think after Fagon, a Targaryen prince or a Targaryen king would be uh, maybe not favorable, but maybe not so far out of reach for um, not just the story, but for the small folk, for the people involved. So,
And one thing I do find interesting is that even if Fagon is revealed to be a Blackfyre, if he was any other Blackfyre that we knew of, like one of the earlier Blackfyres, because of the precedent set by the Great Council with this whole male primogeniture thing, he would still outrank Dany just by the simple fact of being born male. But we're told that the male Blackfyre line ended with Meleys the Monstrous when he was killed by Ser Barristan. So if Fagon is a Blackfyre, we tend to think it's through the female Blackfyre line, whatever surviving female members of the family set up continued on. So it brings into question of what kind of standing Fagon would really be in, even if he is revealed to be a Blackfyre. And then also with Dany too, like with Dany and her dragons, it also sets up like not only this idea of sixth Blackfyre rebellion, but also you get the notes of possible Dance of the Dragons too, because Fagon, even as a Blackfyre, may still be able to commune with a dragon. And now we've seen this with Daemon II. Daemon II, Blackfyre, but he had dragon dreams. Same, just like a full-blooded or not full-blooded, but just like a properly named Targaryen would, like Daeron the Drunkard had dragon dreams. Aegon V had dragon dreams. Aemon has dragon dreams. Well, so does Daemon II. He's a Blackfyre. So by having Daemon II have dragon dreams, that sets a precedence for a Blackfyre also possibly being able to ride a dragon. And one of the theories out there is that Fagon may take while he's out campaigning and trying to take the throne, that he might take one of Dany's dragons as well.
Right. Yeah, on that note, I think Dany might actually believe for a moment that he's who he says he is. I don't know if, it'll click automatically that, oh, this is the Mummer's dragon, or that he's, he couldn't be who he says he is, because Dany has been searching for family.
Yeah.
Ever since. She would be grateful to find actual family and actual actual solace and actual care from an actual family member. And I think she's going to seek that from Fagon, or get some form of it from him. And I think, that dragon might come easier than we all think it would. Because, we all have our assumptions about Aegon the Sixth, but Dany might not share those assumptions to begin with.
Mm-hmm.
She might give a dragon more willingly. And that kind of goes back to Aemon, because Aemon's life does share, a few similarities to Daenerys, both of them being outside of the monarchy, outside of kingship, the exiles, their whole lives. What with Aemon, becoming a maester, and he never, and Maekar never thought that he would ever be in line for the throne. Mm-hmm. So the choice of giving him to the Citadel was, it wasn't in lieu of a crown at any point, but when the crown came up, it was still offered, but it would have been maybe frowned upon morally for, Aemon to break his vows to the Citadel and then go over and take the crown. But when Aemon talks about the three things that he, the three times his vows were tested, it sounds a lot like three things that Dany never got. She never got the crown. She never got to hold her newborn son. And the third thing, I wonder if she'll get a smile from her, quote unquote relative. Or if she'll ever live to see Fagon's smile, or if that's something that she even wants, or if she even, I don't even think that she's been told of him yet, but I'm not 100% on that. So, she might be looking for that reassurance of family. So getting a dragon might not be as difficult as we all think it might be.
Yeah. And if she finds out about him, like, it's hard to know when she's going to find out. Will she not know until she finally crosses the narrow sea and Fagon's already sitting in the throne, or is she going to learn about it from Illyrio because on her in the way back? Now this is like one of the things like I don't know if you caught that interview that Elio and Linda that they did, but one thing they talked about is just a quick 3-minute segment. I mentioned it in my last stream, and I had a link to it in the Mosby stream. There's a link to this interview where they had said one of the big things that's one of the big hangups in getting the Winds of Winter out is because of Dany's story. Like she's spent too much time in Marine. She's too far behind, and trying to get her story caught up with everyone else so that the move to across the narrow sea isn't so jarring and isn't rushed. That's one of the big problems with getting Winds of Winter out. And because she does have a lot of ground to travel over before she could even make that jump. And it seems like somewhere along those travels, a stop off with Illyrio would make sense for her to see Illyrio again at least once before hopping across the narrow sea and going to Westeros.
Yeah, she's the last person, who kind of remembers the semi-safe time in Daenerys' life. I mean, Viserys is dead. Jorah, it has other things on his mind, I guess. But the last person, really to see, normality for Dany pre-Drogo, pre-Viserys was Illyrio. There are more than a few red flags though with Illyrio, and one of which being, I don't know if anybody else has mentioned this, but I put the question out there on Twitter a while ago, was if like you were saying, the male line of the Blackfyres has ended, so we assume that Illyrio's wife Sarah could have been a Blackfyre.
Mm-hmm.
But Illyrio says that she died of grayscale, but he has her hands in a jar. Now, I was wondering, if she had grayscale, why didn't it affect her hands? You'd think if it was bad enough to kill her, like, in Shireen's case, Shireen's hands aren't affected, but it wasn't bad enough to kill her. She was tended to by the Maesters, and they got it, figured out or whatever, and she can touch it now and not be, I guess, not get infected on her hands. But even John Con, I mean, his hand was the first thing infected, and I have to assume that when there's a grayscale outbreak, unless it's an internal outbreak, like unless everybody just drinks the waters from the Sorrows, that the first place they're going to get grayscale is on one of their extremities. So if Sarah died of grayscale, how were her hands not affected? And why does Illyrio still have them in a jar? And my tinfoil on this is that she tried to abscond with Fagon at some point, if Illyrio is Fagon's dad, because he does talk of him very lovingly and very affectionately. If Illyrio is Fagon's dad, I think Sarah tried, upon hearing what Illyrio's plan was, she might have tried to steal away with the baby, and Illyrio took her hands, because only thieves get their hands cut off, to my knowledge. So I'm just wondering, like, what the deal is with Sarah.
Yeah.
It just seems like one too many conflicting evidence there.
Yeah. I mean, well, Illyrio does say that the grayscale came in off of a ship. Basically, the rat. It's very bubonic plague. It came from the rats, which then more than likely means it wasn't really the rats, but the fleas on the rats. And fleas can bite anywhere. So if
true.
If the grayscale outbreak in Pentos that affected Sarah is supposed to be reminiscent of bubonic plague, if it comes from flea bites, or even if it did come from rats and it comes from a rat bite, then it doesn't mean it has to affect the hands first, because a flea or a rat could really bite they can bite you on any part of your body. So that's why you see, like, maybe it didn't spread to her hands. If she got bit on the arm or the leg or the torso or the neck or anything, like, it's still going to spread just the same.
True. That's true.
But what I do see with Illyrio, and I mentioned this in my before I started doing streams when I was doing essays, and the big one was Fagon, a parallel of kings, princes, and pretenders. Illyrio is like a Rhaego Draws figure. This is because Rhaego Draws was a Pentoshi merchant who came from nothing to become the richest man in Pentos, only to be shunned by the Pentoshi aristocracy. So he becomes master of coin under Jaehaerys the Conciliator. What is Illyrio? Illyrio is a Pentoshi sellsword who came from nothing, rose to become the richest man in Pentos, only to be shunned by Pentoshi aristocracy when he married a pleasure slave from Lys. And he was promised the position of Master of Coin by Viserys, and that was the whole point of him backing Viserys back in the day. So Illyrio is like this. He's more like he's to Fagon what Rhaego Draws was to Jaehaerys, because Fagon shares so many parallels with so many, like, not just with Blackfyres, like, because he shares parallels with all three of the daemons, but also pretty much nearly every single Targaryen king, save a few. And even the Targaryen kings that he doesn't share, there's someone else that does share. Like, there's not a Maegor the Cruel parallel that I could trace to Fagon, but I can trace it to Cersei, who is playing a Maegor the Cruel part, in which case that would make Fagon more like an Aegon the Uncrowned figure.
Right.
Yeah. And then, so Fagon shares like all these parallels, all these similarities, and then he's coming off of because the other thing that I always say that the other thing that's interesting, that should be my damn catchphrase, but it is interesting in that the last Blackfyre rebellion, the War of the Nine Penny Kings, we're about a little over 40 years removed from that. So this is the long from the time of the War of the Nine Penny Kings up until Fagon showing up. This is the longest stretch that we've gone on without a Blackfyre rebellion since the first one. But the fact that the Golden Company is still hanging on to this idea, and like I said at the beginning of the stream, long after the original players of the first Blackfyre Rebellion are dead. When we look at the current Golden Company, we're looking at like these are fourth, fifth generation guys. These are guys who are carrying on the grudges of their great grandfathers. Men who have never even seen Westeros. They only have this vague idea of it, but they're going based off of stories that they heard from their fathers and grandfathers and what have you. Stories that go all the way back, that they trace back to the Golden Company's founding. And what's interesting, and that's why we kind of see like some of these guys who pick up names like, because anyone who joins the Golden Company is allowed to choose their own name. And you see guys like claiming to be Muds and Strongs, as well as Peaks and Toynes. And it's hard to tell who's for real and who's just kind of slapping a name on as a way, who's putting on airs to try and get some real legitimacy. Now, you and I, we were talking before we went live. Pretty sure the three guys who are Peaks, they're probably really Peaks.
Oh, yeah, they're definitely Peaks.
They're definitely Peaks. In fact, Laswell, it is the famous Friends in the Reach line comes from Laswell Peak. But then these other guys, though, the ones claiming to be Muds and Strongs, who knows? Like maybe they have some connection. Maybe there's some bastardy connections and they're trying to put a name onto it. But more than likely, these are just guys who have a vague notion of Westerosi history and just want to be able to lay a claim to something if and when they ever get there.
Which is so dangerous because you have people that are quote unquote returning to land that they've never been to lay claim to houses that they've never been a part of. And it's basically the worst people you could ever have vying for control. These people have been mercenaries. They're not rulers. They're not lords. They're not even thinking on that level of having, vassals or having lands or anything like that, fighting for control of vassals and lands and everything like that. And it's terrible. If Aegon takes control and he appoints anybody, from the Golden Company, any, restitution, or gives them back any land or anything, or gives them any holdings, it's going to be bad. They're the worst people you could have. Like, imagine, Harry Strickland with lands and titles. Like, this is not good at all.
Mm-hmm. But like it, and even in that sense, the Golden Company actually shares a similarity with Viserys. This whole idea of they took what was ours, but how can it be yours when you were never around to truly experience it? Now, Viserys Viserys, for his part, has a little bit of standing. I mean, he was at least, I think he was like at least 8 years old before they had to flee across, before Robert's rebellion really came to a head. So he can at least lay some claim to at least being at King's Landing, being in the Red Keep, being in the in the palace, and being at least being a prince for a few years, even though it ended at a really young age. But these guys in the Golden Company, they've never even seen Westeros. So how are you going to hold a grudge against people that you've never known? When you're fighting your grandfather's war, how can you have a grudge against Dorne when you've never even seen Dorne? How can you have a grudge against them when you've never even been into the Reach, when your house was lost generations ago, or in the case of the Peaks, if the people holding it are like cousins, and probably really distant cousins, if anything, because of how far removed you are from the whole thing. And it's this specter that which again, like why we titled this the Spirit of Rebellion. It's a spirit as in an ethos, but spirit as in a ghost. It's this grudge, like a grudge,
like the movie The Grudge.
Exactly. Yeah. That's what I was aiming. That's what I was aiming for. You have the grudge and this discontentment, but also this grudge as this foul specter that's just looming large over everything. But this is like the idea of how hard it is to cut certain blood ties, and how deeply rooted these ideas of past glories can be. Again, going back to Eustace Osgrave, because this is one of our primary counts, is this guy who was there for the first Blackfyre Rebellion, who was there on the red grass field, and his story is just steeped in nostalgia for a bygone time and all of the things that he's lost. And now we're dealing with guys who can't even claim to have known that bygone time, because all they have are stories of a bygone time from people that are now long dead.
And at best, like even Septon Maribald, when he gives his Broken Man speech, he's talking about the War of the Nine Penny Kings. That's the war that he came out of. That's, the war that, it's almost referred to as being even worse than Robert's Rebellion in terms of, lives lost and upset. Just because, like the first Blackfyre Rebellion, the fourth and the fifth, both had huge players from all great houses. Everybody mobilized during that time and went to war. So you have, vassals from all over the place, getting lost and returning home, but that's still fresh. It's not, so fresh. We don't meet too many people from there, but, we do meet Septon Maribald. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's why, like, when Septon Maribald speaks of the War of the Nine Penny Kings, it really is, it's like Westeros's Vietnam, really, and the broken, because again, it's a war that in our current timeline, in our current story, this is a war that's over 40 years ago, but it's still fresh in their minds. And it's like Maribald, and I think that's the idea. I'm pretty damn sure that's the idea that George was going for with Septon Maribald, was the idea of like a Vietnam vet who has PTSD and
Right.
the mind is still there. Sometimes you still find yourself back in the war, back in the stepstones.
Yeah. I mean, it has the modern Vietnam, but also the Civil War where it was fought on our soil, and they're walking lands like strangers in their own land. And it's so interesting, and just that speech is so kind of, it's omni applicable, so to speak. It could be really any war. It could be World War One, probably. When everybody thought, oh, finally it's over. Well, there'll never be war again, and of course there was.
Of course there was.
So, yeah.
Yeah, like the war that end all wars is followed by the most destructive war in the world that we've ever seen. And that's actually what's happening. And that seems to be what's happening here, because of when we think of all of these converging moments that are happening, Phagon coming over, Euron and his grand schemes, the Northern conspiracy, the battle, and then Dany coming over with dragons. So many things happen. This is going to be like this really will be the biggest war that Westeros has ever seen since the Conquering. Like, all 5 Blackfyre rebellions, including the War of the Nine Petty Kings, are going to be so small in comparison to what's coming now, because of how many powerful players are coming, and the fact that this is also the first war since the dance that's going to involve dragons.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And hopefully elephants.
Oh yeah, hopefully. Oh, there better be elephants in the Stormlands marching through the Rainwood or something.
Yeah.
Where's my
For real?
elephant?
They're absolutely. Yeah, and I think it's interesting, especially going back to the feud between Bittersteel and Bloodraven. The fact that they went at it again after 20 years after the first rebellion, when they went at it again in the third or the fourth, it was no longer about Shiera. They had both passed that point in their lives. It was just about hatred, especially on Bittersteel's part. And actually, I think something that most people missed was that during the third rebellion, and I was going to say, going back to what we were talking about, when Baelor was going to give them leniency, and Bloodraven was saying, no, you gotta kill these guys. I think it's great that Aerion was actually agreeing with Bloodraven, and probably nobody wanted to be on Aerion's side, which is probably why they were on Baelor's. If Bloodraven had been alone in his argument, or even just without Aerion's support, I think he had a pretty good argument. I think it's just the fact that Aerion agreed with him that nobody sided with him, that nobody else joined his side, because nobody wanted to be seen with Aerion.
Yeah, and the other thing about that is coming off of the third Blackfyre rebellion, we don't know everything that happened, because this is one of those ones that George is probably holding on to be covered in another Dunk and Egg story. But we are given little tidbits of information, and one of the lines is that we know that Aerion fought in it. We know that Egg fought in it, because this will be a teenage Egg.
Right.
Whereas in the Mystery Night, how old? I think Egg is either like 10 or 12 in the time of the Mystery Night.
Yeah.
And so the third Blackfyre rebellion is 8 years. Is in 219. So he's either going to be somewhere between 18 or 20 when the third Blackfyre rebellion has. Egg's going to be at that perfect young adult age when he fights. And it says Maekar is remembered for his leadership. Egg is remembered for his courage. Aerion is remembered for certain actions. And we've mentioned that the third Blackfyre rebellion, along with the first, is one of the ones that's mentioned to have more than one battle. Like second Blackfyre rebellion never got off the ground. Fourth Blackfyre rebellion ended pretty much as soon as they got there. They landed at Massey's Hook, then they make it to Wendwater Bridge, and it's just immediately there's the Battle of Wendwater Bridge, and that's it. But the third Blackfyre rebellion sounds like it actually went on for a bit. Not like that it raged for a good amount of time before it was finally put out.
Yeah.
But it comes to an end when Hagon Blackfyre is slain treacherously after yielding his sword. Now, there are those who think that, okay, Bloodraven probably killed him, but I'm on the board that I'm betting it was Aerion. Aerion seems like the type who would have stabbed a man while he was down.
I gotcha. I have it in my head that it was actually Aegor Rivers.
Okay.
Because if Hagon had Blackfyre, wanting to give up the sword would be to give away the only this symbol of leadership that the Blackfyres had. So I think that giving up the sword would have been worse in Bittersteel's mind than losing Hagon. I think the second Hagon tried to give up the sword, I think Bittersteel cut him down. But it said, after he gave up his sword. Actually, the line is interesting because I think George is trying to tell us that it was Aegor. It says the pretender Hagon I died in the aftermath of battle, slain treacherously after he'd given up his sword, but Aegor Rivers, Bittersteel, was taken alive and returned to the Red Keep in chains. Just because they're mentioned in the same sentence makes me think that they're referring to each other. I think the treacherous act was on Aegor's part when Hagon was just, not just a boy, but he was younger and less seasoned than Bittersteel. If he'd, gotten spooked or thought he was on the losing side and tried to give up his sword, Aegor would have killed him without a second thought. He would rather continue fighting than lose. And I think that's the problem that Hagon presented to Bittersteel was Hagon wanted to surrender and Bittersteel didn't.
Yeah.
And I think that's why it was treacherous. I don't think it was treacherous once Hagon had switched sides. I think it was treacherous because the person that cut him down was on his side. But I'm totally on board with Aerion doing it too. I wouldn't even doubt that Bloodraven did it. But something about it tells me that Bittersteel killed Hagon.
The thing about that is, I love it. Let me build on it. But the problem I see with that is it doesn't explain how did Blackfyre make it out, the sword.
Right. Because Aegor Rivers gets captured.
Gets captured. If Hagon, so it's interesting in that we're told that Hagon yielded his sword, but we're not told if that sword was Blackfyre or just any other sword. Right. And if it was Blackfyre, then Aegor killing him for trying to give it up still doesn't explain how it still got away, because while it makes sense that Bloodraven was allowed to take Dark's sister to the wall with him, very, very doubtful that they're going to let Aegor Rivers, after a third rebellion, take Blackfyre to the wall with him.
Right. But even if they didn't want it as a symbol to be ever used against House Targaryen, it still doesn't make sense that they would send it to the wall with Aegor Rivers. They could send it to the wall separately, and it would make even more sense.
Exactly. But I think if the Targaryens ever had a chance to confiscate Blackfyre and get it back, they would have taken that chance.
Absolutely.
So one idea that I've had actually is that Blackfyre wasn't at the Third Rebellion at all, because again, going on this idea how different the Third Rebellion is in comparison to the Fourth, and how it seems like this was their best shot to take it since the First. How they seemed more structured. How this seems like there were multiple battles in this one. Like maybe the certain actions that Aerion Brightflame is remembered for, if it's not killing Hagon, then I definitely see him committing some war crimes.
Keep talking. I'm listening. Sorry.
Well, but in order for that to happen, that would imply that there had to be at least at least two battles, more than one battle, somewhere where he would have been able to commit a crime like that and it still be remembered. But one idea that I had is maybe Blackfyre was gone before the Third Blackfyre Rebellion even happened. That maybe one of the reasons the Third Blackfyre Rebellion was was more like structured, it's because they might have had funds for it. And now, granted, that could come from the years they spent making contracts in the disputed lands and fighting for the free cities. But I was thinking maybe they pawned Blackfyre. Maybe the idea of taking the throne was more important than the sword itself, and that could explain how Blackfyre ends up in the hands of Illyrio, if indeed that's what's in the chest with Illyrio, is that maybe Bittersteel had pawned it off beforehand as a means of getting the funds to even launch another rebellion.
That's a good idea. I like that idea. I don't see him getting rid of the symbol of the Blackfyre Rebellion, but I do like the idea that it meant more to them as a like a token, as not what it represented, but what it could get them, in somewhere other than in a fight.
Yeah, I think it's something we need more information on. And it depends on how backed into a corner were they, if selling the sword to if the money was more important than the sword at that point.
Right.
Because then when the fourth rebellion launches, it's 17 years later, after there's a 17-year gap between the third and the fourth rebellion. And it's said that at the fourth rebellion, the Golden Company has like no Westerosi support, next to none. They show up in tatters. Their banners are tattered, and they look like they're in tatters. And it's immediately snuffed out at Wendwater Bridge. It seems like just like they were just absolutely massacred. Daemon the Third, grandson of Daemon the First, is killed by Sir Duncan the Tall. Somehow, Bittersteel escapes miraculously for a third time.
Again, right.
George has so much explaining to do how that one keeps happening.
And then dies as a mercenary, later on.
Fighting a useless skirmish in the disputed lands.
Yeah.
But again, it's such a what I'm getting at is the fourth rebellion is such a 180 from the third rebellion in how little support it is, and just how unstructured it is. And that's what makes me think, like, I'm thinking that the peak uprising was probably supposed to be the fourth Blackfyre rebellion, but the peaks launched it prematurely because the peaks launched the peak uprising is in 233. The fourth Blackfyre rebellion is in 236, and the 6-year long winter that they're coming off of starts in 231. So it's like it seems like the peaks were getting impatient. They were probably itching for a rebellion, and Bittersteel is across the narrow sea saying, no, it's not time. You're in the middle of winter. I can't sail over there. And then the peaks just seem to just get they just grow impatient, and they launch the rebellion too early. So then when this winter finally does come off, and the Blackfyres are able to get across the narrow sea again and sail in these new springs, they're doing so without the full support that they would have had if the peaks had just waited a bit.
It's so funny how many times they trip up. Like, even in Eustace's speech to Dunk, it's literally just a string of if this hadn't happened. Yeah. And even this one, you're right. The peaks did get impatient. And then, they, by doing so, they left the fourth rebellion out there to dry. They would have landed, they landed at Massey's Hook right up from, So it's just bad timing is all. I feel like everything.
It's timing, it's logistics. It's If the peaks had held out and waited for the Blackfyres to get there, then they probably. But the other thing too is that even though the peak uprising is seems more like a premature Blackfyre rebellion, like Blackfyre Rebellion 3.5, if anything, it still
Right.
achieved. It actually achieves more than the Blackfyre rebellions ever did because they killed the king. They killed Maekar.
Right. And but again, in a weird way that didn't really seem like it should have killed Maekar, or that it was intended for Maekar, or anything like that. I feel like
It's just
like
a
you know
yeah.
unlucky shot, pretty much.
What's another comparison though that I can show with the Peak Uprising and Maekar is it's almost also like Balon's rebellion with King Robert because we have Maekar who's a warrior at heart, but his time as king is seen as over a relative peace. So I could, and because it's interesting that Maekar personally, even though he's king, he's personally leading the response to the Peak Uprising. Same with Robert. Robert is these are years following Robert's rebellion. We're in a time of relative peace. He's growing bored because it said when Balon Greyjoy launched his rebellion, Robert smiled and then basically said, "Get my warhammer." Like he was happy that there was a rebellion because it gave him something to do. And I'm thinking Maekar might have been in the same state of mind, like finally something's interesting happening. But unlike Robert, who walks out of the Greyjoy rebellion completely unscathed, Maekar pays the ultimate price and dies in what should have been a small uprising that should have been relatively easy to put down.
Right. But again, it's just the wrong place at the wrong time. He got, a rock that was thrown off of Starpike with no aim in particular is what kills him, which is that's a little too Baelor, just like his brother. Just wrong place, wrong time.
But then so the Peak Uprising then also has all of these ripple effects afterwards because not only did King Maekar die, but there's also Lord Robert Rain and Tywalt Lannister, and their deaths are going to play a big part in what eventually leads to the rebellion of the Rains and Tarbecks when Tywin Lannister comes to be Lord of Casterly Rock.
Right.
And then it follows through with the fourth Blackfyre rebellion when Tywin Lannister, even though the fourth Blackfyre rebellion ended with very few casualties, like it does come at the cost of the death of Tywin Lannister, who was King Aegon V Squire at the time, and that also has a ripple effect that for the future.
Right. That's true. Yeah, it's interesting with Tyon being the twin with Tywald. Yeah, it's like those Targaryen twins that would get knocked out at the same time for no reason.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's just an interesting repercussions. And then, of course, after the fourth Blackfyre rebellion, everybody kind of settled into their respective areas. The Lannisters took the Rains and Tarbecks out shortly after that. It's like everything solidified after the fourth rebellion. Sorry.
Mm-hmm. But the fourth rebellion, going back to the idea that these rebellions always seem to come after a time of strife, even though the fourth rebellion failed spectacularly, it still fits that mold because it's coming off of a 6-year-long winter. It's coming off of the death of a king. We now have a young, untested king, King Aegon V, a person that nobody ever expected to become king because of how far down the line of succession. Like, if Aerys the First thought he was never going to become king because of how many people were in the line of succession in front of him, with just his brother and his 2 nephews, Egg is so far down the line because of all of his brothers and all of the nephews and everything that he has. Nobody, that's why he's Aegon the Unlikely. So, and he's also, even though we tend to like we as readers love Egg. Egg's not a very popular king because of his treatment of the of his lords in regards to the small folk. Like there's the idea that Egg was more commoner than king than anything because of his time with Sir Duncan the Tall and coming to know the small folk and trying to make laws to try and make their lives easier, but that comes at the expense of lords and the privileges that they tend to enjoy.
Right.
So it's actually kind of interesting that the Fourth Blackfyre Rebellion didn't have any real Westerosi support, because because given all of the schemes that happen during the Great Council that put Egg on, like trying to give the throne secretly under the table, trying to give it to Aemon, it seems like the Blackfyre should have actually had more support than they did during the Fourth Rebellion, with lords, even if it's just lesser lords, who should have had a grudge against Egg. So, but I think
Right.
that it just seems like at that point, maybe just after the Peak Uprising, nobody wants, and the Peaks always being associated with the Blackfyres, maybe even with Egg being king, nobody wants to touch that with a 10-foot pole. Nobody wants to be associated with the Black Dragon again. Not the fourth time that they're going to fail.
Right. Now, what do you think about now Arya hears Illyrio, and I'm assuming Illyrio and Varys talking in Game of Thrones. And it's kind of up in the air. I feel like some people have said that, oh, George didn't introduce the idea of the Blackfyres, until later. It wasn't a thing, because it's not in the Hedge Knight. You know what I mean? Even though it had it's like between 10 and 13 years prior to the Hedge Knight is when the Blackfyre Rebellion is, but there's no mention of it in the Hedge Knight. So people have said like, oh, this idea wasn't brought in until much later. But in Game of Thrones, in Arya's first chapter, she's talking to Jon about the heraldry on the Lannisters. The boys are hitting each other with sticks in the yard. Mm-hmm. And Arya's talking to Jon about the heraldry, and Jon is saying, yeah, how upjumped is that they couldn't even be stags. They had to be like half lion, half stag. They got to put their name on everything. Mm-hmm. And Jon tells Arya, well, you can make your own sign at some point, or one of them tells the other one, oh, you can make your own sigil at some point. And I think Jon says, oh, bastards get the sword, but not the name. I'll look for the particular quote, but it's such an interesting quote that it's
I know the line you're talking about.
Yeah, it spells out Blackfyre all over it, and it's a really interesting line for George to introduce, which is why I think this is a precursor to learning more about ultimately Jon's heritage, because the first person to bring up this whole thing and the only bastard for whom anything in our story matters, like it did in Aegon the Fourth's time, is Jon.
Yeah.
Rhaegar wasn't overly promiscuous. He didn't go out and have a bunch of bastards, but he did have one, as presumably a bastard. I don't know if he and Lyanna got married, but yeah, it's just such an interesting. This has everything to do with Jon's story. How? I don't know. What Fagon is to Jon? Probably nothing that we can think of, but still, there's still something about it. Oh yeah, so Jon shrugged. Girls get the arms, but not the swords. Bastards get the swords, but not the arms. So yeah, that to me was like number one. All right, he's setting it up for for Blackfyre to mean something to someone.
Yeah.
And likely Jon, but Fagon, like I said, Fagon will be the stand-in for that. Now, if Fagon does get the sword, I think as a contrast to Jon, I don't think he'll be able to wield it properly. The same way, Jon has trouble with Longclaw. It says it Longclaw slashed through the air. It seemed to have a mind of its own. And then when there's the mutiny at Castle Black, John goes to pull Longclaw out, and it doesn't come out of its sheath.
Yeah.
And I think something like this will happen with Aegon and Blackfyre should he ever get the sword. I know Tyrion overhears Illyrio, talking in High Valyrian about the sword, or somebody.
It was one of those
or
things
in Skari.
It was an early draft where Illyrio is talking with the guys in High Valyrian when they go to meet Raleigh Duckfield and
right.
Halden Halfmaester. That Illyrio is speaking in High Valyrian, but Tyrion makes out 3 words, and one of which is sword. But then George scrapped that and rewrote the chapter because he felt like that gave away too much.
God damn it, George.
And instead we're replaced with the line about, we still get the ideas of the chest, but there's no mention of sword. But there is a mention of candied ginger, and that's one of the things that stood out to me, the fact that Illyrio says, like, there's candied ginger, I know the boy loves it, and it's like, how? And that's what really got me on.
All right, sorry, Tim.
Oh, no problem. Gotta take, family comes first.
Yes, sir.
So getting back on track.
Yeah, where were we?
All right, so we're talking Illyrio, and I brought up the idea of is Fagon not just a Blackfyre, but is he also Illyrio's son, because of the just the strange things like the children's clothes, the gifts, the ginger, the candy ginger, and the line that Tyrion gives when they depart, how sad Illyrio looks. Like, this really does sound like a father who misses his son, but knows that whatever his son is doing is too big, it's too grand a thing for that to matter.
Well, I think Illyrio knows once everybody else is in power the way they want to be in power, there's no reason to have Aegon even on the throne necessarily. The power, power resides with the king, but that's not where power flows from. Power flows from money. And Illyrio doesn't necessarily need to have Aegon on the throne to get money. He just needs to have the people that he's been working with, e.g. Varys and anybody in any port city that Illyrio has contracts with. He just needs to get them into power instead. Mm-hmm. And I think I will stand by this notion that Fagon is Illyrio's son, that Sarah was in fact a Blackfyre. Yeah, I'll get behind that. It feels, because it's plan B or plan C for them, right? At first it was Viserys, then it was Dany, and now it's Fagon. And I think for a plan C, they had to have something that had been, a plan that was in the works, their last ditch effort, the one that they had been sitting on for 20 years, which is this kid who is, like they said, born to be, or bred to be king. But how much did it cost to retain John Connington? How much did it cost to have Septa Lemore on staff? It doesn't seem like they put too much time and effort towards this. They only just kind of let Fagon in his own corner with people they had. I mean, they don't even have to trust John Connington. They can just say, oh, we're gonna get your stuff back. We'll get justice for Rhaegar or whatever it is you're after. And mm-hmm. he would have hung out until he died. I completely am on board with Plan C being Illyrio's actual son, mm-hmm. Because it must have been something that they couldn't rely on anyone else for. So I don't think that, I don't think that Aegon being anybody else's child or them owing anyone else for their final plan. It doesn't feel, they wouldn't have 3 things up in the air if they didn't put one up themselves. So I'll definitely side with him being Illyrio's son, related to Illyrio somehow.
Yeah. Well, it makes me think of like when we looking back at that line again of some contracts are written ink and some in blood, and the focus on that is for the Golden Company, as always historically being Blackfyre supporters. But it could be, but the line is delivered by Illyrio, and it could be Illyrio referring to himself, and by that I mean his wife Sarah Blackfyre. That it's now obviously having your son being the king of Westeros is obviously advantageous, but it might not
Right.
be more about that. It might actually, but Illyrio really seemed to have loved Sarah. Like he gave up because before that he was because Sarah was his second wife. He was married to a relative of the Prince of Pentos. And even though he was shunned when he took Sarah to bride, her being a pleasure worker and lease, he lost all of that. He lost all of his aristocratic contacts. Like he was shunned by the aristocracy, but it didn't matter to him because of how much he loved Sarah. And that brings us back to another line from Aemon about how love is the death of duty. If
Right.
Illyrio truly loves Sarah so much that he would want to put her son on the throne to advance the Blackfyre cause, he could be doing it at the complete expense of all of his personal wealth. Like, think of that line from Thanos. So, like, what did it cost? Everything.
Everything. Yeah, okay, so there's two reasons that Illyrio could be doing this for Sarah. First one being that he really loves Sarah. Mm-hmm. Second one being that he's really ashamed about what happened to Sarah, and because she died as part of this dream, I'm tying this back to my tinfoil that Illyrio had something to do with Sarah dying. Mm-hmm. That he thinks, oh, if she died for it, this woman that I really loved, if I had to, if I told her about the plan and she tried to abscond with the baby and I had to kill her, well, frankly, either way, he's set on this track with Aegon to get this thing done. So I think it's highly likely for a number of reasons that he's doing this. Yes, for his wife, but at the same time, I mean, Illyrio is so pragmatic. I don't know that he would recognize that he would honor somebody post-mortem. But I guess that's kind of what he's all about, right? Trying to get Viserys and Daenerys back on their respective thrones. Like, he does seem a little... like a little nostalgic in that way. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I definitely feel like his motivations are much closer to home than we think.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, like, I don't believe that Illyrio truly supported Viserys. He probably saw Viserys more as a means to an end, because the original plan was that Viserys was supposed to show up with Dothraki screamers. But I had talked about this on when I was on stream with David Lightbringer, about how the idea of Dany burning King's Landing, and all that matters in a situation like that is the optics, what the people see. Well, if Viserys comes across the narrow sea with Dothraki, what's that going to look like? It's going to look like, oh, it's the son of the Mad King bringing a foreign army. And that was probably and then that would have weakened Robert. And then probably the idea is that then, and I also don't think Illyrio probably was not expecting Dany to come back. He thought that Dany would probably just die out on the Dothraki Sea somewhere, or she would just at least stay out there, staying married to Drogo and just be content with that, because technically she was a slave. Because Illyrio had no way of knowing that Dany was going to come to love Drogo, or that they would start to develop a mutual respect. When Dany's first sent out to be with Drogo, it's merely it's a business transaction more than anything. It's Illyrio selling, it's essentially him selling Drogo a slave, because that's what she was originally meant to be, a slave bride. It didn't matter to once she left his manse, like Dany was an afterthought. So I think like it's more about having Viserys show up with Dothraki, and then him being the optics of it. The son of the Mad King shows up with a foreign army, and then Robert and being too weak, and the Lannisters not being able to handle that, but then have Fagon come in with the Golden Company, who at least would be, while also being a foreign mercenary group, at least can claim some Westerosi descent. That's something that Dothraki can't. So it seemed like Viserys was more of a means to end. Viserys was never meant to actually sit the throne. He was just more to soften Westeros with this foreign army, and then Fagon comes in as the hero and saves the realm from Viserys and from the weak Robert, who couldn't put a stop to it. Like, I think that was the whole grand master scheme. Like, these are the eggs we're breaking to make the omelet.
Right. And yeah, that does feel accurate, actually. And yeah, even Viserys tells Daenerys, I'll let Khal Drogo and his whole Khalasar have his way with you if it gets me my crown. And compared to Illyrio, he's got tunnel vision. He's not even thinking out of the box. Viserys is not half as cruel as Illyrio, just for lack of experience and imagination. So yeah, I think Illyrio was definitely on that track. I think he saw Dany as completely disposable, and we should probably think of Viserys the same way in his eyes. So yeah, I think what I had referred to previously as their plan C might have just been their step C. Step A, have Viserys attack. Step B, destabilize. Step C, Fagon comes in and has a better claim to the throne, or is kind of a reversal of the Mad King's reign, where Viserys gets dispatched of or disposed of before they can before he becomes a real threat to Aegon. And then people, of course, would have sided with baby Aegon, especially the way Varys hypes it up to Kevin in the last chapter. And I feel like he does this just in case there's anybody listening. But the way that he, espouses Aegon is really interesting. It tells a lot about not just the Varys's character, but also it completely fills in that the shadows on the wall that Varys talks about with Tyrion. Because that's Aegon is the ideal shadow. And Varys and Illyrio at this point are starting to seem like the ideal puppet masters, because they've gone how many regimes? Aerys II, Robert, the Lannisters, so 2.5 regimes without having to change their plans too much. Obviously Dany's a wrench in those plans, but I'm sure Illyrio's fine with her being lost in the Dothraki Sea or being tied up in Meereen.
Well, now Illyrio's not too happy, because now Dany's disrupting the slave trade.
Right. And that's true.
And that's the other thing too. But what really brings up that is, it really brings into mind Varys's whole hypocrisy about the whole thing. Because yes, he claims that he wants to do what's good for the realm, but if he truly meant that, then that would have meant working with Rhaegar, who actually would have been his dalliances and prophecy aside, like, he probably would have made a good king, at least much better than the Mad King that his father was. But Varys doesn't. Instead, Varys spills the beans about the coup, about the plans at Harrenhal, and the Mad King shows up and throws a wrench into that. So no, Varys is more focused on putting his project king on the throne than he is in what he actually would have had a good king sitting right in front of him in Rhaegar. It also speaks like how can you say you're doing what's best for the realm when you're working with a slaver like Illyrio? especially when
Right.
you're trying to put on a king on a Westerosi throne where slavery is supposed to be illegal. I mean, it's kind of
Ideally.
ideally. I mean, it's still feudalism, and then the Ironborn. God,
Right.
the
Explain your
thrall.
thralls.
That's what's so funny about Victarion is that he actually does try to draw a line and say, no, it's different. It's thrall. It's like, no, but that just sounds like slavery with extra steps. But no, Victarion is convinced that there is a difference that there is a difference and that there's actual, and that plays into Ironborn culture. It makes it more palatable to them. And the idea that no, thraldom's different because are they slaves? Well, essentially, but their children could be born free, and that like Carl the Maid is the son of a thrall or the grandson of a thrall. So it's like, but
Right.
whereas in slavery, no, if you're a slave, your children are slaves, your grandchildren are slaves. Like they're trying to play thraldom as more of an indentured servitude than anything.
Well, I'm sure it feels that way.
Yeah.
You know, because the Ironborn look at their ships the way great houses look at their houses. So if you have a thrall aboard your ship, you're kind of in equal standing. I mean, he would be right even to draw a parallel between thralls and wards, being that Theon eats the same food as the Starks and pulls his same weight around the house, because that's really what a thrall is when they're aboard a ship. Is they eat the same food, they do the same work. Yeah, they're slaves. Yeah, they'll never own lands or have their own title, but are they? It doesn't carry over to the landlubber's idea of a slave simply because of what they're slaves on.
Mm-hmm.
They're slaves on the same vessel, so in a way they've kind of got he's got a point there, but no, they're definitely slaves.
Yeah, like when they capture those ships and he takes the rowmen out and tells them, you are no longer slaves. Instead, you now will sail for the Iron Fleet, and then just makes them the rowmen for his own ships. But to him, it's different. There is a difference. And then he even says, like, Victarion is a free slaves, and he thinks that what he just did, even though it's literally just taking them off one boat and putting them on another and making them do the exact same thing, he sees it as being different, and he sees it as something that might endear him to Dany, because he's like, no, they're no longer slaves, they're workers, they sail for our fleet now. Even though it's literally the exact same thing, they're still getting chained up to a boat and made to row.
And still, even in the speech he gives the three hornblowers aboard his ship, we all saw what happened to the guy that blew the horn the last time, and he's just handing these out as a job. He's like, you're gonna go first, you blow until you die. You're gonna go second, you blow until you die, and then if we need you, number 3, guess what? You blow until you die. Okay, everybody, have a good day. And Victarion is a great character because he's just so far removed from any humanity, or anything like that. He's the perfect vessel for Euron's godlike inhumanity. But yeah, like same thing. He just looks at it like a job, and this is your job, and you do your job. When there is the parallel there, to people like. Eustace Osgrey, who looks at the death of his 3 sons like they were at work that day and it was a bad day at work. And you're kind of like, damn, Eustace, how can you be so insensitive? But the lords look upon, I guess Eustace and his sons is a bad example, but the lords look upon their underlings as things, and Victarion is a really good example.
Yeah. And then let's see. So we've covered the second.
I think we've covered up to second.
We've covered like up to the. We've been jumping around because of the way, because of how like one thing leads into the other, and one family who is a supporter is an enemy, and one who is an enemy is a supporter, and it jumps around. That's what makes the rebellions so interesting, is just because of how much of them were just this hodgepodge of different houses, and how what was an enemy one day is a supporter the next. Like how the Rains kept in the first Blackfyre rebellion, the Rains tried to keep a foot in each camp. By the time the third one rolls around, they're firmly on the side of the crown. But then other houses come to change sides, and then there's the then of course there's the phrase being phrase, which we did not talk about that. Because of the second rebellion is built on this wedding, this Frey wedding, and you have the phrase Lord Frey, who obviously was at least considering throwing his support behind Daemon II, until he saw that he didn't have the sword Blackfyre. And then when word gets out that Bloodraven's coming, then he just slinks back to the twins. And then what happens? Bloodraven shows up, and now all of a sudden Lord Frey is marching with him, doing all he can to save his own ass. So it's typical phrase being phrase.
Right. And that's definitely already carried over with the phrase, deeming that. And now it wasn't just, let's get this straight. The Red Wedding was not just a family thing. It was not just a disgrace on House Frey that Robb decided not to marry. What's her name? Frey.
Rosalind.
Yeah, Rosalind Frey. It's not just that disgrace. It's the fact that they saw Robb as fighting a losing battle. So they took Tywin and Roose Bolton up on their deal to sabotage Robb's fight there before it could even leave the twins, and that's so reminiscent. So the Freys are already back at it with the double crossing. Get it? Double crossing. I get it now.
George, you tricky bastard.
For real.
All that wordplay. But it's back to also, again, like, what are the Freys? They're another second tier, third tier house. They're the ones that are lending support to Blackfyres. It's never a main house. Just like how in the Golden Company, even though you can choose your own name, nobody's ever claiming to be a Lannister. Nobody's claiming to be a Stark for whatever. It's always these lesser houses, or even extinct houses that they're claiming lineage to.
Almost as if it's a competition to see, to pick the name of the most deserving second house. The Golden Company is like the Second Sons, and I think that they share that name, right? Just the idea of a second son not getting the kingdom, like Daemon.
Yeah.
And being really upset about it. I feel like there is an air of competition to name yourself the most retributive, second string house, to be, the most underdog character there. Like, we're, like you said, we're the Peaks. Oh, we're the Toynes. We claim the damage on our house was even bigger than the damage on yours. Mm-hmm. So it's an interesting thing to see that amongst the Golden Company.
Yeah. And Bittersteel did a year-long contract with the Second Sons before founding the Golden Company. So he had taken the knowledge that he had gained with the Second Sons, founded his own company, and his own company is basically made of second-tier houses. So it's like one thing leads into the other.
Exactly. I think it's interesting too that the Second Sons has been around forever in Essos. Yeah. So I feel like this isn't the first time that the second in command, the second to the victor, has risen up in this sort of revolt. I feel like this is a common Essosi thing, is to get exiled to Essos, build a small army and come back pissed off, ready to claim what's yours. Mm-hmm. I feel like this is pretty much an Essosi tradition at this point.
Yeah. Like that goes back to the dance when the North marched down prepared to die only to find that the war was over. Um Krieg and Stark said, like, no, these are winter soldiers, old men, second sons, people that aren't going to go back because the whole point was to march down and die so that they wouldn't be a burden on their families. Well, what are they to do now? They came looking for a war and a war is over. But
Right.
some of them marry the widows of Riverlanders who died because the Riverland, just like in pretty much every war, just like in the War of the Five Kings, the Riverlands usually is the kingdom that suffers the most in these Westerosi wars. But then there's also
Absolutely.
a sellsword company made up of Northmen who go across the narrow sea because they're like, okay, well, we can't return home and we came looking for a fight. Well, someone's Mir, Tyrosh, and Lys are always going to pay good coin for all this bullshit in the disputed land. So you would end up with a northern sellsword company operating in Essos because of just how many sellswords are needed over there.
Yeah, there's always a fight to be had somewhere.
Always a fight, especially between the free cities, and it's always, but it's usually always such a useless fight, and then that ends up being Bittersteel's ultimate end. He fights and leads three rebellions, trying to do this great cause of putting his brother on the throne, putting that brother's children on the throne, then a grandchild on the throne, fails in all of them, and then dies in a nameless battle, in a nameless war, in an ongoing series of useless skirmishes that never end between these three cities fighting over just this barren plot of land.
Right.
So it's like it's Bittersteel's story, even like the Golden Company story. It's a story of futility, really.
Yeah. And Bittersteel's story has been that way from the very beginning.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, what a life, man. I can't imagine being that pissed for that long and never having anything to show for it.
Yeah.
Good gravy. But I do think it's interesting, especially so. I feel like Melee's the Monstrous's image is kind of reminiscent of the other rebellions in the fact that Bittersteel was the head on everybody's shoulder.
Mm-hmm.
On Daemon the First, he was whispering in his ear. Daemon the Second, he was also Bittersteel had left him on his own, but still they kind of always had that chip on his shoulder, literally chip on his shoulder for not being accepted by Bittersteel, and that made the second rebellion all that more, I guess, tragic or ironic, that he put himself out there and didn't succeed. And same thing with Hagon and Aenys. They both had Bittersteel like a little head on their shoulders, and as soon as he dies, the Blackfyre, or the last Blackfyre Melees, sure enough, has a little head on his shoulders. So I think that's a really interesting way to incorporate a Bittersteel foil without it actually being Bittersteel. It's just a little tiny head this time.
Yeah, and it's because Melees is also coming off this period of uncertainty because Bittersteel, because up until this point, the Golden Company really only knew one captain commander, and that was Bittersteel, the one who founded it in 212 up until his death. And then we get Melees' cousin Daemon, and who Melees kills for it. We really don't know how many other captain generals there were in between that. It's possible that that immediately went from Bittersteel to Daemon, and that Daemon held it up until Melees killed him. And then Melees being the last male Blackfyre, then when he dies, that also put, like, just for that, it's like, where does the golden, yet for somehow the Golden Company endures after that, but it's now led by non-Blackfyres, non-Targaryens, but it's still, even after Bittersteel's dead, even after the last of his Blackfyre descendants are dead, at least on the male end, they're still carrying his will. They're still fighting for his grudge and the grudges of of Daemon and all the other Daemons that came after him.
Right, and that's a really interesting. That should be my tagline too. That's really interesting. No, that's it's a neat way that they make it seem like, I know they call themselves a company, but how like an actual company is that once the original founders die. It's taken over in a myriad of different ways, ending with Strickland was master of coin for somebody.
Toyn.
Toyn was master of coin.
Blackheart.
That's right. Yeah. So you have these people stepping up like they are running a company, and they're stingy, and they're they have their own values in place. I think it's interesting now to see the bifurcation and the divergent behavior from from like John Connington and homeless Harry Strickland, to see them kind of pissed off at each other for doing little things inside this same company, because it has grown above and beyond, even though they keep Bittersteel's head supposedly somewhere. It's gone just beyond his grudge, the initial, founding principles. It's definitely moved on to something else. And that's what makes it so dangerous, because like you said, they're not fighting for what the company was originally started for. It's impossible. They can't. They're, returning to lands where they've never been. So it's a really, really, really just, shitty spot. And it doesn't help that all the players involved in the Golden Company are shitty too. Like the Fossaway, who just wants to kill Fossaways. Like, that's excessive. Can we not bring him this time? He just keeps talking about damn Fossaways. These really are the worst people to have in charge, except for the bloody mummers or whoever. Like, this is not a good group of people to be winning lands and titles and being awarded should Fagon make the throne.
Yeah. And like Harry Strickland himself, he says his great grandsire had been there since the beginning. The Strickland, after the first Blackfyre rebellion, House Strickland basically goes into exile. We don't even know where House Strickland was originally from. So they definitely seem like to be one of these really low tier houses that, while the Peaks were like when we talked about the Peaks had 3 castles, 2 were taken away. But then other houses, if they're really small, then they probably had everything taken away. And it sounds like House Strickland, whoever they were, was probably one of these houses that had everything taken away from them. So Harry Strickland's great-grandfather goes over, and he's there at the founding. So Strickland is there since the beginning, and he calls it 4 generations of gold. But then John Connington thinks it's 4 generations of failure. That's really what you're boasting about.
Right. I mean, failure looks different to John Connington versus Harry Strickland, who's been making money off of the contracts they have picked up. Because they are a prestigious company. So of course, any businessman is going to look at it like, oh, positive revenue flow. We've been doing good. And any fundamentalist is like, no, we've done nothing to advance the traditional, reasons for even existing. So it's a neat way to look at failure versus success in the eyes of different beliefs.
But I guess, like, to Harry Strickland's credit, he is still honoring, because when John Connington gets over there and he sees that, oh, Toyn is dead and Harry Strickland's in charge, are things still going to go the way we thought they were? Because Toyn had been on board for the whole plan, but it still seems like Harry Strickland is still honoring the plan. Like, he does. Because even with Harry Strickland in charge, the Golden Company still breaks the contract with Mir, something that breaking a contract is something that they have never done. So it does seem like Harry Strickland is still committed to the cause, even if he's more of a businessman than someone who'd be in this for blood ties. So Golden Company still is fighting towards that ultimate goal. It's just weird that it's taken so long, and also, and like we said, because the last Blackfyre rebellion has been over 40 years ago at this point, and it isn't even remembered as a Blackfyre rebellion because of it being more of a subset in this overarching war of the Nine Penny Kings.
Right, and which is just a rebranding, right? I mean,
Yeah.
Melee's, I'm sure would have called it the Fifth Rebellion or the Blackfyre anything, but he kind of had to appease the other 8 people that he had with him on that one. But yeah,
that's the one that's
so good.
It didn't even make it while the fourth Blackfyre rebellion ended almost as soon as it began. At least they can claim that they at least made it to Westeros. The fifth didn't even make it past the Stepstones.
Right. Well, I would say that the fourth rebellion was spurred on not just by hardship in Westeros, right? The 6-year-long winter, where we have the weather presenting an issue, and then the deaths of Maekar during the Peak Uprising. The realm is in kind of limbo at that point. But then Bloodraven murdering Aenys Blackfyre was a big one, and I think that made it kind of a now or never grab for Melee's. And
killing
go on.
Killing Aenys probably, when you say like killing Aenys probably was more of a like, well, now we have to respond no matter what,
exactly.
even if and I think like with the fourth Blackfyre rebellion, there probably were members saying like, we can't, like what are we going to do? We have no support, but it's like, no, it's the principle of the thing. They killed one of ours. We need to respond in kind.
Yes. Yeah. I think many things, many situations kind of capitulated into the War of the Nine Penny Kings. But yeah, it's interesting how advantageous all of these things are. And yeah, I know I mentioned before, but it's interesting that so much of this, even the original Blackfyre Rebellion, so much of it happened because of animosity towards Dorne. And here we are again with, Arian Martell edging closer to Fagon as he edges closer to King's Landing. And, the Martell's playing a much bigger role in what's going on right now, because that feels so reminiscent of Aegon the Third. Aegon the Third. Who's Baelor's dad?
Baelor the Blessed.
The Third.
Baelor the Blessed or Baelor Breakspear?
Baelor Breakspear.
That's Daeron the Good.
Okay, Daeron the Good. Okay, yeah. So Daeron the Good took a Dornish woman to wife.
Yeah, Mariah Martell.
That's right. So it's funny that we have the Dornish playing a big role here as we move forward with this new Blackfyre rebellion, or Blackfyre's grab for the throne, because that's going to be a big echo. Everybody that's pissed at the Dornish is going to come out of the woodwork.
Yeah.
And everybody who's sympathetic to the Dornish, and the Dornish might actually come out of the woodwork, which would be great.
Yeah.
A war with the South would be so interesting at this point to see in the story.
Yeah. Which makes the whole Friends of the Reach thing even more interesting, because it's like Friends of the Reach more than likely means Marcher Lords. Well, how are they going to feel with having not just Dornish support, but that's not just the fact that it's Dornish support, but it's actually House Martell. Because at least in the other rebellions, when there was Dornish support, it was House Ironwood. And House Ironwood House Ironwood, as being a first man house, can at least have while they're Dornish, they can have those first mantis that make them more palatable to reach houses of Stormlanders. But House Martell, them being Roynish, because so much, it's not just the Dornish marches, the Marcher Lords being against the Dornish for being Dornish, but more of it has to do with their xenophobia because of the whole Rhoynar thing. Like, I feel like Dorne would have been more accessible to the kingdom if it didn't have this Rhoynar influence. Like, it really seems more xenophobia than anything.
Yes.
As in how the Ironwoods are more acceptable than other Dornish houses to be on their side.
You know, it's interesting that you say that, because even though, you know, we have a group of settlers called the Andals who are they share a common name with the real life settlers, the Andalusians, I believe it is, that settled in southern Spain. Mm-hmm. It's funny but the Andalusians were Moorish, I believe, from you know, the east. And they had dark skin, and they weren't accepted in Spain, and, you know, yada yada yada. They share so many of these qualities with the Dornish, and it just stems from non-acceptance, from being from this almost like mystical or gypsy-like culture that was the Rhoynar, and yeah, it just stems from lack of understanding. You know, with Rhoynish culture, it being so different, and them coming to Westeros and running things their own way, and never, you know, unbowed, unbent, unbroken, right? Mm-hmm. They never compromised their way of life and their traditions and their beliefs, and that made them hard to get along with. Imagine that. Yeah. And no, go on.
And then, of course, there's also the special privileges they get. Like, they're still allowed to call themselves prince and princess. They get special tax rights and all of that stuff. And then, well, you probably have like people of the Reach say, well, we can't call ourselves the princes of the Reach. We can't call ourselves the Storm Princes. We can't call ourselves this. Why do they still get to be prince and princess of Dorne? Like, when we're still,
right,
but we're only lords.
Yeah, that is, that is depressing. And I've always wondered who they were prince and princesses to. Is this something that they're saying because I think they thought that prior to Aegon's conquest as well, the mm-hmm. prince and princesses thing. So even before there was one king of Westeros, I don't know if it goes back, if it predates the kings of the Seven Kingdoms, or the Gardener Kings or anything like that.
It goes back all the way to the Rhoynish wars against Valyria, the whole prince and princess title.
So I've always wondered who, if they're all princes and princesses, who's the king and queen in their established tradition or in their established vocabulary, because they are not referring to the king and queen of Westeros, and they haven't been for hundreds, thousands of years.
Well, it said like the Ironwoods considered themselves kings. The Danes were originally kings of the Torrentine, and then when Nymeria came over and made and who did she? Mors Martell. When Nymeria came over and combined her strength with Mors Martell, that's when they really started beating back the Danes and the Ironwoods. And it said that she sent 5 kings to the wall, because these are guys who claim themselves to be king of this part of Dorne and king of this part of Dorne and king of this part of Dorne. But no, after that, it's when Nymeria lends her strength to Mors Martell and they combine their households. That's when the Martells really, which is really House Nymerios Martell, if we want to use the proper title, that's when they become like, no, we are the top house in Dorne, and you are all going to be beneath us. Because up until and really, that's just Dorne acting like any other kingdom in Westeros before Aegon's conquest. It's just a constant succession of different kings and different petty lords all vying for the top. And the spirit, but that's what brings us back to these Blackfyre rebellions, is that it holds the same spirit. Lesser households vying for that top spot, and then looking for any reason that will allow them to do that. Like we said, some people like Eustace Osgrey really did believe in the Blackfyre cause. They really believed that Daemon Blackfyre was the better choice. But then other houses don't necessarily believe in Daemon, but they attach himself to his cause because of what it can get them.
Right. I also, somebody else brought this up. I'm wondering what your thoughts are on this, but Quentin Ball, Bloodraven killed Quentin Ball. This just sounds like something that the tactics of war that is removing the support from your enemy versus removing your enemy. It's a very Bloodraven thing to do, to knock the legs out from under the rocking horse. So yeah, I think Quentin Ball definitely was shot by Bloodraven. There's maybe it was him in a glamour, but to just have a random arrow the night before the big battle.
Night before.
Oh, come on.
Like, is it like it's weird because it's like, is it wrong place, wrong time? I mean, granted, if you're Bloodraven and you see Quentin Ball and you're like, and you see him and he's right there, then of course, like, yeah, take the shot is obvious,
right?
But yeah, it does seem like is it coincidence, or did it just happen to be that way? Like, and that's what makes it, and it's up for speculation because it sounds like the way it's written, it sounds almost like Quentin Ball might have just been walking out to go take a piss or something, and that's when it happened.
Right? Yeah, the way Eustace says it, it's like, if only Quentin Ball hadn't been shot by some asshole the night before. Like, come on, really? You don't think there was any correlation there?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's too funny. But yeah, I was going to say, yeah. So somebody in the chat was saying, yeah, the women can inherit down in Dorne too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think all of these, these cultural differences with Dorne. I think the Dornish now being so active, especially Arianne Martell, if she gets close to Fagon or seduces Fagon in any way, I don't think it's a good thing. I mean, I want to see Dorne succeed. I like the Martells. I like what they've got going on, but something about this situation just seems a little a little hokey.
I've said many times, and I'm sticking to this. Doran Martell's plans always fail, and that's what's going to happen. The oranges are too ripe.
It's true. And he might wait too long, but I don't think his kids will. I don't think Arianne will wait too long. She jumps the gun like nobody's business.
If anything fucks up for Arianne, it's going to be Elia Sand. It's going to be a Rhaegar Lyanna type situation because there's so many parallels between Elia Sand and Lyanna Stark.
Oh, very true. Yeah,
and then that could be Fagon's like maybe daddy, like son moment.
Torn Martell's the Buffalo Bills. Yes. Yes, he is. Wow. Yeah. So, where were we? Okay, so
I think
have we done the third Blackfyre Rebellion justice yet?
I think we have. We definitely talked about who killed Hagon, who we think might have killed Hagon, what happened, what may have happened to Blackfyre. We did mention that Egg and Maekar and Arianne all fought in this. We mentioned, I guess one thing, if we want to have as a final topic, is okay, so this would be the second time that Bittersteel escapes, because he makes it after the first Blackfyre Rebellion. He recovers Blackfyre. He has his duel with Bloodraven, takes Bloodraven's eye, and he flees across the narrow sea to Tyrosh. Right. And it's obvious who is propping them up, because it's Rohan. It's Daemon's wife, Rohan of Tyrosh, is the daughter of the Archon of Tyrosh. And so we can at least get an idea of who was putting up the Blackfyres. Well, it's probably the Archon, but
Right.
I have to familiarize myself. But I don't think the Archon of Tyrosh is one that's. I don't think that's a lifelong appointment. Or actually,
Archons. I feel like Archons rule for life, like Triarchs.
Okay, yeah, the Archon is the. All right, so it's not like the Prince of Pentos that gets elected in, or the other free cities that have like these councils.
So they've got some pull as the Archon. They have family pull.
And in the second so he flees across to Tyrosh, and that's where, at least that's where we know he's being put up. Him and the remainder of Daemon's sons, or all of Daemon's children, anyway. And then in 211, when the second Blackfyre rebellion happens, we get the line from Maynard Plum, Bloodraven, that Bloodraven is looking to Tyrosh, and that's why Dagon Greyjoy is kind of getting getting ignored. And when Bloodraven appears proper at the end of the story, he says that he's keeping Daemon alive because if he were to kill him, then Bittersteel would just crown
the next in line.
Would just crown the next in line. But then it's the following year, 212. That's when Bittersteel founds the Golden Company. And then it's not until 219 that they launched the third Blackfyre rebellion. Now, when we talked about how these rebellions always come off of a time of strife, we're not told exactly what led up to. I mean, we've already been given a whole slew of reasoning why people didn't like Bloodraven and didn't like Aerys, because of we're coming off of the Great Spring Sickness. We're coming off of this drought. We got Dagon Greyjoy reaving. That's all happening between 209 and 211. What's happening again between 211 and 219 for a third rebellion to happen? So it just seems like Aerys's, as the years go by of Aerys's reign, really Bloodraven's reign, it seems like things just keep deteriorating more and more and more.
Yeah, so, I mean, that's when we have the most BS Targaryen deaths of all time, right? Rhaegal choking on the lamprey pie. Have you looked up what a lamprey is? Did you know what a lamprey is before hearing about a lamprey pie? Who would eat this pie? Oh. I looked up what one was, and I was like, oh, no wonder I've never heard of it. It's absolutely terrifying.
Yeah.
So, and then Aelor Targaryen, getting snuffed out by a freak accident. Yeah, so I definitely see this. Yeah, sorry, go on.
So when I was putting in my reasoning, like all I really had to go on until we get another proper story to show us what's happening in the later years of Aerys's reign. All we can go on is just like, well, we already had these, so maybe it's a continuation of these things. Maybe like Dagon Greyjoy is still reaving, and that's getting ignored by the crown, and the kingdom, Westerlands and North are taking that in their own hands to kind of do like that. Maybe there's another plague. Maybe there's another. It seems like there's going to be somewhere along the line in this 8-year gap between Daemon Blackfyre's rebellion, between Daemon II and Haegon I, some other great catastrophe must happen in order for the Blackfyres to feel like, okay, this gives us an opening to go in. Or maybe it could just be as simple as Daemon II dying in captivity. Because, like Bloodraven said, the reason he's keeping him alive is so that Bittersteel can't crown Haegon. So maybe they were just waiting for Daemon to die, and that was enough of a catalyst for them to launch this rebellion.
Which was the right choice. Mm-hmm. I mean, as long as I feel like everything Bloodraven does is the right choice. Hanging on to Daemon II was the right choice. Killing Aenys was the right choice. King Aerys, tries Bittersteel, but then lets him go to the wall instead. Mm-hmm. If he had just sentenced him to death and let the death, I feel like any leniency on the Blackfyres is the wrong decision.
And there's a good chance that if he had put Bittersteel to death and killed him right there, the Golden Company having only existed for a handful of years, probably there's a good chance it could have just fallen apart right after that. Like, I think one of the reasons that the Golden Company has been able to endure as long as it did is because of how long Bittersteel was allowed to live and how many years Bittersteel had in just cementing them as a force. If he had been killed after them only existing for a few years, they wouldn't have had that decades long foundation that they were able to have by having Bittersteel in command for nearly 30 years, like he was, by being allowed to live.
True.
But I guess the question I have is, Bittersteel's escape. Like, okay, so he's put on a boat and he's supposed to go to Eastwatch, but the boat is intercepted by traitors at court, friends that Bittersteel still had at court. My question is, who are these friends at court, and how are they going unnoticed by Bloodraven?
Oh, that's a good question. Yeah, by saying friends at court, I mean we'd have to assume a Westerosi friends.
Yeah,
but that is a really good question. I mean, it's not like anybody. It couldn't have been what, Manderley's?
Yeah, that's the thing, because at 219 when this happens, that's 10 years into Aerys's reign. That's 10 years of Bloodraven being hand, and this is coming off of him already having been years as Master of Whisperers under Daeron. So it seems like Bloodraven should have been able to any questionable people, any people that would have had Blackfyre sympathies, probably should have been uprooted from court by then. So it just seems like really interesting that this late into Aerys's reign, again, this late into what is really Bloodraven's reign, that there's still Blackfyre supporters in these kinds of high positions.
Right.
It just seems to me like with that much time as hand, he would have had all of those factors removed, but somehow he didn't. And I guess it just goes to show, like, but that could just be George saying, like, as great Bloodraven is still only human, and things are going to, even with his vast network of spies, there are still always going to be things that fly under the radar.
Yeah, you have me thinking now. Was it the red wines? Was it the Who else even has a navy or even has ships? Well, then again, friends at court might have hired ships.
Yeah,
that would probably be the best way, instead of using your own banners. To hire. Like to hire the son of the time. So I would look no further than what pirates were out during that time, who was available to even knock a ship. It's not like it's that hard. We're getting reports from Hardhome that how many ships are already gone.
Yeah, and then for him to escape a third time after the fourth rebellion, it's like this is becoming a comedy of errors. I mean, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. Fool me three times. Who the fuck at court keeps talking and saving this man?
Right.
Like I said, it's very interesting. George has a lot of explaining to do.
Of course it was the Sons, because the Sons came back in the War of the Nine Penny Kings. It could have been Salador's ancestors that came in and just scooped him up. Yeah. Oh, interesting. Yeah, I never thought about who those friends at court could be. But then again, Son wasn't notably a part of Westerosi court, so I'm not sure.
No. But, well, it could have just been somebody who just paid someone else to do the dirty work for them.
True.
It's just interesting. It's just interesting to think about, like, how did this guy keep escaping so many times?
Yeah, like what a power of will. You'd think he would have been able to, like, reconcile some feelings in himself that maybe he should just be lucky to be alive. But no, that never
Nope.
even occurred to him.
Nope. Nope.
No.
Bitter
Oh yeah, I
Steel
was
was
gonna.
from the day he was born to the day he died. Bitter Steel was pissed.
Yeah, in the words of the man himself.
Mhm.
Oh yeah, I was gonna ask you. Do you think Brown Van Plum is a kind of foil for Fagon that the dragons might take to, anybody with a drop of dragon's blood?
Yeah, that is interesting. Like, it's interesting about Ben. I think Ben Plum is supposed to make us think more of like Nettles
Mm-hmm.
because of like
Okay.
because of like not just because of his skin color, but also because of how far removed he is from Targaryens or just Valyrian ancestry. Yet, yet the dragons are taking to him, and I think it's supposed to, like, just like Nettles, is supposed to call into question of how important really is the blood of the dragon, or maybe it's supposed to make us think of like dragon riders even older than Valyria that could have these ties, like Great Empire of the Dawn stuff.
That's true too. I
Yeah.
like that. The link is there between Viserys Plum and Brown Ben Plum, and then we have Maynard Plum.
Mm-hmm.
In the same book. So I like that George is using the kind of temporal tripod there to draw us a picture of this. Like you said, obvious cousins to the Targaryens who still are recognized by the dragons as having dragon blood, or a drop or two drops, as Tyrion says. Which
Yeah.
that two drop line is one of the best Aegon's Bastards lines of all time. That he dipped his quill not just the one time, but twice
Yeah.
to produce the plum line.
And then Aegon. I guess this is something we can talk about too, because our next stream that we plan for together is an Aegon 3 character study. He had a third daughter locked up in that vault, and we really don't know much about her. But if Aegon the Fourth scores a hat trick, if it turns out that he actually scored a hat trick with all three daughters, my God.
Yeah.
He
No,
we
it's just
know
the implications are terrible.
he definitely got 2 out of 3. We know that for a fact, but I wouldn't put it outside the wheelhouse that maybe maybe he nailed all 3 in the maiden vault.
Yeah, very likely. I find that another foil for for John, that Aegon was forced to marry Nerys, and Nerys loved Aemon. And yeah, I just have this, like, it's such a foil or a comparative essay for John, being that maybe he was Aegon's, or sorry, maybe he was Ned's, or maybe he was Rhaegar's, the same way as Daeron was either Aegon's or Aemon's.
Yeah.
It's so interesting that the most of the Blackfyre Rebellion is built. I mean, everybody has a different reason to be involved with the Blackfyres, but most of it is built on either its supposition of a lie, or like just either instigating or subterfuge or something. None of it is built maybe between Bloodraven and Bittersteel. There's a good case for hate, but almost everybody else, it's built on just like the smallest technicality, or something that some event that snowballed during the last 4 rebellions.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's so interesting. It's the whole thing is totally built on just these assumptions and these small little lies that lords tell each other.
Yeah. And just these grudges that just span generations that really at this point shouldn't mean anything.
True,
but
Christina.
Whatever. I guess it also just like ties to the idea of men will look for war with whatever reasoning they can put, even like just the slimmest justification is all you need. And that's
Right.
what we see. That's what we see with these continuing rebellions.
Right.
Even to the point where you can arguably say like the Blackfyre bloodline at this point is so diluted, does it even really count anymore?
Yeah, it's true. Now I wonder if if this is a Blackfyre plot, does Bloodraven care this time? Is he on the same page as the rest of the kingdom? Is how is he still alive and yet one eye is not fixed on Essos, on what's going on? I feel like if anyone were to even care that this is Blackfyre related, it would be Bloodraven.
Yeah.
But he's shown no signs of caring thus far.
Yeah.
So I just wonder what the motivation is to even have, Blackfyre be a part of what's transpiring, because it is there. George gives us the sign from the dragon, the dragon inn, right? It fell into the river black and washed up red.
Mm-hmm.
He's giving us these parallels and allegories and everything to support this being another Blackfyre rebellion, but without Bloodraven conscious or of the same mindset that he was, what good is this? It's this fifth rebellion, other than like I was talking about when we were messaging over Twitter. All of these rebellions are going to sandwich, and all the worst events of each one are already taking place. Right? We have the Dagon Greyjoy, Euron Greyjoy parallel happening, on the Iron Islands. We have upset in the Westerlands. Tywin and Kevin just died, just like Tybalt and Tyon, and
Northern Conspiracy, Skagosi Wild Card.
Yeah,
Dance
it's definitely Skagosi Wild Card.
Yeah, Dance of the Dragons 2, Fire and Blood Boogaloo. It's all coming.
Right. All the worst conditions from these things, a possible grayscale, outbreak, the Riverlands being just torn to hell, the Dornish getting super involved. What's that?
Oh, great! It gets worse.
Yeah, it really has. Yeah, and I'm sure you've noticed this too. Like all the worst facets of some history, coming to a head and being presented in George's story, kind of all at once. This will definitely happen with the Blackfyre rebellion, but who cares that it's Blackfyre if not Bloodraven? I don't understand the significance, because, like you said, Daemon the First or Daemon the Second had dragon dreams, which doesn't it. What did dragon dreams make for a bad ruler? Why are we rooting for Daenerys if dragon dreams are what we thought made her exclusive, or what we thought made the red dragon different from the black? It's easy enough to say, oh, the black was just the fire and the blood side, and the red is this mystical. But they both had the mystical, and they both had the fire and blood. They both had the crazy. They both had the willfully determined. It's kind of a
It is.
I wonder what's going to happen the second Blackfyre feet touch Westerosi soil. Is Bloodraven just going to pop up and freak out, or what's going to go on?
Well, it is a good question, because there would also have been 2 Blackfyre rebellions preceding this one that he wasn't around for, because the death of Hades comes before the 4th Blackfyre rebellion.
That's true.
When the 4th Blackfyre rebellion happens, Bloodraven's already at the wall. And by the time of the 5th, and I don't think he's even Lord Commander yet. And then when the 5th Blackfyre rebellion happens, so Bloodraven's already had to sit out 2 of them by being at the wall. So I'm actually not sure how he would respond to a 6th. Because where was his focus during the 4th and the 5th? That's like one question I have asked that I posed on Twitter was, with Bloodraven at the wall, did he still have people sending him messages? Like, ravens go to the wall. Did he still have friends at court? Like, how far did those 1,001 eyes extend? Like, was he still, even when he was sent to the wall, was he still keeping tabs on things south, or did his focus completely turn to the north at that point?
Yeah, I wonder. I mean, if their idea was to send him to the wall to isolate him, I mean, maybe Maester Aemon couldn't even have gotten letters for fear that that Bloodraven would intercept them and read them. Because how could you have a Maester from the Citadel, kept in the dark for so long?
Mhm.
It just doesn't seem right. I feel like Bloodraven must have definitely been paying some measure of attention to the realm. Otherwise, he would have risen to Lord Commander a whole lot faster. I
Mhm.
mean, I think it only took somewhere between, 3 to 7 years to become Lord Commander, but still, it took John half that.
Yeah.
Um, so it's
Yeah,
kind
because
of, yeah.
John was ready to march on the Boltons, and Bloodraven, like you can argue, like, well, maybe Bloodraven wouldn't do that because he took his vow after taking his vows to the Night's Watch. But the thing is, Bloodraven has already shown that he's willing to break taboos that Northern houses hold so dear because he broke guest right by killing Aenys. It's what got him
Right,
to the wall in the
right.
first place. So how can we be so sure he'd be willing to honor his Night's Watch vows when breaking Northern tradition is what got him there in the first place?
It's so weird that he did that, though, being somebody who, I mean, the Blackwoods are old house, old gods to the
Yeah.
max. They're Old North. How did he break guest right and think that I mean, not even if you have to, right? The gods hate people who break guest right, and there is no right. Even the rat cook wasn't justified
Mhm.
in breaking guest right. So why did Bloodraven think that he was justified in breaking guest right? It's one of
Yeah.
the oddest mysteries to me. When somebody who's told not to do something and is from a family who heralds not doing this thing, like pissing off the old gods, but then they go and do this thing.
Yeah.
It is really weird. That is very strange. That's a really good point.
Yeah. So if I had to guess, I would say when Bloodraven made it to the wall, his focus became more on the north because if he's already broken these traditions, then the idea of him breaking Night's Watch vows and marching back south for another Blackfyre rebellion seems like totally within the realm of possibility. But something kept him up there because he didn't intervene in the fourth rebellion and he didn't intervene in the War of the Nine Penny Kings.
He must have known that once Bittersteel was dead, the rebellions would be no big deal.
Mm-hmm.
He must have known. I mean, even though he wasn't there for um, the fourth rebellion, even though Bittersteel was there. Oh God, he had to have known somehow.
Yeah.
Like what? He got sent up in 230. He got sent up there in 231. No, King Annie dies of natural causes. Yeah, so like 236 or shortly before, and then yeah, the fourth rebellion happens shortly thereafter.
Yeah.
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, he must have been fresh to the wall. They must have not even, yeah, they must have not even told him lest he, abscond and head south. So that's a good question. Um, but again, that happened on the Stepstones. If he had any ties into the Weirwood network at the time, it might not have shown up because not only is it, even further south than Dorne, they never made it past the Stepstones.
Yeah. It's possible that maybe when the fourth, okay, because fourth Black, he's sent to the wall in 233, and fourth Blackfyre is 236. So maybe he had a John moment where he tried and was just stopped.
Oh, yeah.
Like,
yep.
because he goes up there with a bunch of the Raven's teeth. So maybe some guys just hold him back. Like he made it. Maybe he made an attempt to get down there, but someone reminded him of his vows and just like look, man, you can't keep breaking these things because this is what got you here in the first place.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and like Christina says, he's an omniscient tree wizard, so I think he knew. I do too. And I think he knows about this time, which leads me to wonder why he isn't so concerned about it, because all the forces are at work this time that weren't, present earlier. He must have some omniscient, view of what's about to happen to know that it doesn't cause a serious threat or that it's some necessary part of what's going on. It's weird when he was in power that so many Targaryens died, yet he was always on the side of the red.
Or it could simply be that after becoming the omniscient tree wizard, he just sees that the others are the biggest threat. Like we get that line from Stannis,
right?
The old enemy, the only enemy that matters. By this point, Bloodraven might be of that mindset of like, hey, this Blackfyre stuff, it's small potatoes. The true enemy is the others.
Right. I mean, which could also be could be an offshoot of the Starks or an offshoot, earlier Blackfyre parallel from the Starks or from some family in the north that the Blackwoods have previous connections with. So he might be just tapping into a much more ancient version of the same battle. Mm-hmm. Between the Blackfyres and or between the Blackwoods and the Brackens, the Blackfyres and the Targaryens. Further back would be the Starks and the others, pretty much.
Yeah. Now, maybe if Fagon gets a dragon, that might draw more Bloodraven's attention, and then he might look to Bran and say, okay, never mind what I said. Go take care of this Blackfyre kid, because he's got a nuke now.
Yeah, right, effectively.
Yeah.
Yeah, I am interested to see what Bloodraven, what his take on having dragons even is.
Yeah.
Because did Egg see the last of them? No, Dunk saw the last of them. So Bloodraven would have been alive when dragons were alive, I believe. No. Yeah.
Wait.
No.
Well, the last dragon died during Aegon the Third's reign.
Okay.
Egg tried to hatch dragon eggs. That's what gets us the tragedy at Summerhall.
That's right.
And
that's right.
It
that's
leads
right.
to that theory that dragon eggs are like grenades.
No, who said that he saw one when he was young? Was that Arlen of Pennytree that had seen one when he was young, or was it
Daeron the drunkard saw a dragon? He saw a dragon dying in his dragon dream, but then that turned out to be a Breakspear. And Daemon II claimed to have seen a dragon egg hatching, but that was a metaphor for Egg coming into asserting himself and coming into his own.
Right. God, I'm trying to remember. There is a character though that saw the last of the dragons. The last, was so small and whatever.
Oh yeah, that's the one that's the last dragon, the one that was like maggot bone white and bit the girl. That's during Aegon the Three's reign. That's when the last dragon dies out.
We're answering this once and for all. All right. Any other topics you wanna hit on before we get into predictions?
No, I think we're good. I think we should think we're on our way to closing this out.
Cool. So definitively, the one thing I wanted to hit on, and we talked about it right before we came on here, was who the friends in the Reach are. Mm-hmm. Because I think this is, I think that this rolling out will be one of the most surprising, especially, a lot of people are assuming House Tarly is part of it, which would put Sam in such a bad fucking situation. Mm-hmm. Yeah, okay. Sorry, I'm looking up when dragons died. Oh yeah. The last dragon died in 153. Okay, so who would have been alive in 153? Yeah, Prince Aegon and Prince Nerys had Daeron. Okay, yeah, so not too many people would have even been alive then. That were alive in... Oh yeah, that sucks. All right. Anything you want to touch on? Give me 1 second. I'm sorry.
Well, when we're talking about Friends in the Reach, like I am definitely on the House Tarly bandwagon. Given Randall Tarly's his feelings towards House Tyrell, his misogyny, and how he believes that House Tyrell is run by women, and just the low opinion he has of Mace Tyrell. He strikes me as being one of the likely candidates of being a Friends of the Reach. Even his current position on the small council, he is making he's making light of the Golden Company, even though the Golden Company is a legitimate threat because they're going to take Storm's End. So him making light of that situation and trying to keep the focus off of them plays too much into the Golden Company's hands to not, like, especially with Randall Tarley, he doesn't seem like a dumb man. So for him to be trying to downplay the Golden Company, that seems deliberate. So it seems like so that's why I really feel like he's one of the friends of the Reach, that he's one of these people on the take. And like we said so much throughout the stream, so much of Blackfyre support has been the second, third tier houses vying for supremacy, vying to knock off the current top house. So with Randall Tarley already having a chip on his shoulder about the Tyrells, having such low respect for Mace and his viewpoint that it's run by women, that it's really Olenna pulling the strings, it just seems like too perfect. He seems too perfect of a candidate to not be a Blackfyre supporter.
Right. Same with the Rowans.
Mm-hmm.
I think they mentioned that on what's it, the Emmett Booth mentioned that one, especially because Mathis Rowan goes up for Hand of the King and gets turned down by Cersei. Just they would just have had it with the Tyrells and the Lannisters and the current monarchy. And I think a lot of these, like we said in the beginning, the houses that first participated in the Blackfyre rebellions were old blood grudges, since Aegon the Conqueror, since the Dance of the Dragons. These were a lot of houses that really had these huge grudges, and it's interesting to see how many houses have grudges now. Tarley, Rowan, what was the one you mentioned before we started the stream?
Oakhart.
Yeah, Oakhart, big time grudges.
Yeah.
And then there's Quentin Ball kind of parallel with Darkstar, right? Who wants to be part of the Kingsguard. What happens if Darkstar gets turned down for the Kingsguard and he has, I don't know, Dawn or an equivalent dangerous blade? He's gonna be pissed and jump to whoever's side.
And going on Rowan, like Mathis Rowan's last known whereabouts are at Storm's End. When we want to think parallels, in the first Blackfyre rebellion, House Lofton had originally declared for Daemon, only to betray him at the end and turn cloak and declare for the crown. Well, since George loves to do these parallels and also these earned verses, House Rowan could be playing the part of Lofton, only this time they're declared for the crown, only to turn cloak at the last moment and declare for the Blackfyres. And with the Golden Company needing to take Storm's End, having a man on the inside like Mathis Rowan, who's already at Storm's End, plays in their favor. And then going off Darkstar, the idea is that with Fagon being a fake and having the Golden Company, who are like a company of fakes, claiming to have these names of long lost houses. The idea is like that Fagon's going to, not Fagon, that Darkstar is going to steal Dawn, but that he is going to be like a fake Arthur Dayne to Fagon's fake Rhaegar. Which also leads me to believe that another candidate that Fagon may pick up is Edric Storm, who would be another key to Storm's End, and would make him like an Oris Baratheon to Fagon's Aegon the Conqueror, because again, Fagon's so many parallels. I wrote this all in the essay. Edric Storm would be like an Oris Baratheon figure. It would be, to bring Edric Storm in would be like burying the hatchet with the Baratheons and bringing Baratheons back into ending the grudge of Rhaegar and Robert by having their sons come together in peace. And then it can come with the idea that that Fagon could then legitimize Edric. Edric Storm becomes Edric Baratheon, and the new Lord of Storm's End.
Right. Sorry, my cat's jumping all over me.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Yeah, it's an interesting thing. Who's got grudges, especially in the wake of Cersei, because Cersei is just ruthless and laying people down left and right who oppose her. I would like to officially put in my vote for House Kui while we're on the air. House how Cuy, however that's pronounced.
I'm going with Kui.
Kui, yeah, Kui sounds good. After Emmon Kui was killed as a member of Renly's Kingsguard, I think House Kui has every. He was killed by a Tyrell, I believe.
Yeah, he was killed by Loras.
Yeah, Loras Tyrell. Yeah. So three were killed by Loras Tyrell in a fit of rage after Renly's death. Emmon Kui, Robar Royce, and a third guard. So there's room for the Royces, who are, a northern house, but they're not. They're not wrapped up right now in the bullshit in the north, are they?
Well, no, the Royces are in the Vale.
They're in the Vale.
They're wrapped up in Littlefinger's bullshit.
That's right. They are wrapped up in Littlefinger's bullshit. I don't know what house I was thinking from the north. Yeah, so I wonder if they would jump ship, or if Littlefinger would take sides as part of a Blackfyre plot, because Littlefinger has a lot to gain.
Yeah.
From siding with this new regime, new institution. But then again, it's not like Littlefinger and Varys would ever fully be on the same side.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure.
Well, for me, I'm with you on House Kui. I'm definitely, again, I'm sticking with House Tarly being for all the reasons I mentioned.
Yeah.
I'll go with House Rowan playing the part of the Lostons. You need this rebellion's turncloaks, because again, George loves his foils and his inverses. Rowan is close. Rowan Lofton, it matches up. And then Oakheart, because of the death of Aerys Oakheart. That family, the Oakhearts, still look at the Dornish as their enemies, even to this day. And for Aerys Oakheart to die in Dorne, to be killed at the hands of one of Doran Martell's men, I believe that the Oakheart family would go seeking restitution. But then that plays into this idea of, having then the Martells support the Blackfyres just muddies the water so much.
It does, yes.
Yeah.
And I think there's going to be a bit of that. I think we're meant to question, who's right.
Yeah.
And naturally, we must have larger houses taking Fagon's side. I mean, might have the Hightowers, the Martells, might even have the Royces taking Fagon's side if the Hardings take control of the Vale.
Yeah.
If I was a Royce, I'd be pissed if the Hardings took control of the Vale.
But it goes back to, like, so much of Blackfyre support is always such a hodgepodge. Some of their supporters are in direct conflict with other supporters. But then it's like a whole enemy of my enemy is my friend situation, when the reality is, no, that's never true. The enemy of your enemy is still your enemy.
Right.
And that's probably the real world equivalent that George is alluding to by having all these different houses, some of them have direct conflict with one another, but still trying to come together under this greater banner because they can see something they can get out of it.
Yeah, that's true. And everybody's got something to gain. My God. I mean, Cersei's just a scourge, first off. So anybody has so many. That's why Fagon's going to be so well liked, right? Because Cersei is who he's replacing. And in stark contrast to Cersei, he's better in almost every way, only because she's regent and she, is flexing her power
Yeah,
in
that's the
in
thing.
really shitty
For
ways.
Fagon, the bar is set so low.
Exactly, yeah.
Mhm.
And he only has to come in and give, and really not even give the people that Cersei shafted anything, but to make it look as though he's a more generous ruler
Mhm.
than she was is not hard, especially if Varys is in control.
Yeah.
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 Yep. They'll open the gates of King's Landing if Fagon comes while Cersei's still alive. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, she's just terrible.
King's Landing, the people of King's Landing will open the gate to anyone who throw them a slice of bread at this point.
Yep.
Yeah. It could just
That's
be
very
as simple
true.
as that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Man,
And
I'm looking forward to the
yeah.
sixth Blackfyre Rebellion.
Yep. And if you have anything else, though, I think that's a good place to end it.
Yeah, I don't,
Going
man.
on.
I'm out.
Yeah, we're
Going
almost
on.
at 3.5 hours. And we actually touched upon a bit for our next, like some of these ideas that we discussed, I want to hold on to, like the maiden vault, because a lot of that's going to play into our Aegon the 3 character study when we get to, because we're going to cover the stuff that we know in Fire and Blood, but then of course we're also going to, second half of that stream is going to be speculation on his later reign stuff for Blood and Fire, Fire and Blood Part 2. Blood and Fire, Fire and Blood ends with the end of Aegon's regency. We get a little bit more nuggets of information in the world of Ice and Fire, but once we get Blood and Fire, and see the second half of that reign. But I know me and you both got ideas, so ripe for speculation until we get the book proper.
I know, and I can't wait for that. It just how much Fire and Blood answered questions I didn't even know I had about the pre-Aegon the Third's.
Yeah.
That the time in there was just, and it presented more questions than it answered. So yeah, I am looking forward to Blood and Fire, but not as much as Winds of Winter.
Oh yeah, we all want win. I'm at the point where I want anything. Just give me. I've said too, like if putting out Blood and Fire first helps, if putting out another Duncan Egg novel helps to get Winds out, I'll take it. Just give me something. Give me something at this point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now it's interesting how big of a role the Blackfyres play in the Duncan Egg novellas. I mean, they totally eclipse 2 of the 3 stories told so far.
I think that's what George was aiming for. Like, this is why we're going to get our Blackfyre Rebellion stories. Is it's just in these side adventures.
Yeah. Yeah, and in really indirect ways too. Like with Septon Maribald, it's totally unclear what war he's referring to, but it's also a Blackfyre rebellion. And I think a lot of this trauma that the country has gone through, and maybe not the Riverlands, maybe not the North in particular, but a lot of like those recent scars are Blackfyre induced trauma that the kingdom has suffered. And yeah, I think it just the fact that it's so fresh in everybody's minds, that besides the golden companies, the houses in Westeros, like what Doran was alive for the War of the Nine Penny Kings. Like it really wasn't that far long ago.
Sir Barristan fought in it. He killed Meleys.
Yeah, Barristan was the badass of the whole thing. And I'm interested to see. Yeah, I'm interested to see who the new Barristan is. There's also a weird Fireball parallel with Sam, because he's already had a child with Gilly. So there's like the Glendon Ball issue. Like what is the, or not had a child with Gilly, but saved Craster's child.
Mm-hmm.
And in the show, he played him off as his own. In the books, I mean, he hasn't made that distinction yet, but it's, with all these little Glendon balls running around, like Rickon going to Skagos and being, like a possible legitimate heir in Manderley's eyes. Like, dude, I don't know. So much stuff is about to just implode all at once at the heart of the story. So I'm really excited.
Yeah,
I'll take another Dunkin' egg. I'll take I'll take anything from George. Same.
Yeah. All right, so we're gonna end it there for tonight. We covered a lot of ground, and hope everyone enjoyed the stream. Hope everyone joins us next time for the Aegon 3 character study, the speculation, and then that's also going to bring up, when we're talking that's also going to bring up talks of like Viserys II, Sandok the Shadow, Death of the Dragons, all kinds. It's another fertile ground to cover for speculation. Right,
there's a lot there. Yes.
Yep. So for now, I'm just gonna play out. I didn't do the intro, so I'll play our song for the outro, and then that'll be it for the night.
Cool, Tim. Well, thank you, man.
Thank you.
I don't get the chance to thank you.
Oh, thank you for coming. Thanks for agreeing to come again for another one. I really enjoy these streams with you.
Anytime. Same.
It takes the pressure off me to have someone to talk with about it.
Oh yeah, and it's easy to get me rolling. Just spin me in a direction. So
I know these.
I really appreciate it.
3.5 hours, and it really didn't feel like it took that long. They flew by.
When you love what you're talking about, you know.
Exactly.
Cool.
So.